Hello, welcome to Jason Cavness Experience. I'm your host, Jason Cavness. Our guest today is Crystal Clarity. Crystal, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
So, Crystal, first question. I think on your website, or somewhere I saw where you're a fierce optimist.
Yes.
Where did that come from?
I think, and I've actually done a lot of research on optimism. There's a lot of science behind optimism and how it manifests and affects people's lives. And part of that I learned is that there's an element of optimism that some people are more prone to be born with, and then there's learned optimism. I would say I think I probably was born with more optimism than a lot of people, but I've also made it a commitment in my life to learn to be more optimistic. And I think for me, what that means when I think of optimism, I think of resilience. And so I think when you try to approach life from a perspective of flexibility and resilience and learning, then to me, those are kind of the traits that I associate with optimism.
Do you see yourself drawn to other optimistic people, or are you more drawn to negative people, so to speak, or you just try to find a balance?
That's a good question. I really love being around other people that are also sort of optimism minded. With that said, I also enjoy helping people who maybe aren't naturally optimistic to become more optimistic. So my husband is not optimistic. And over the last 25 years of being together, um, I think it's been a journey together, but I have enjoyed the process of helping him see the value and how your life can be better and more whole and fulfilling if you approach life from a little bit more of an optimistic perspective. So I think I sort of gravitate towards people who are optimistic. I also find reward in trying to help people see how their life could be better if they would be just a little bit more optimistic.
So, how do you find that balance? 'Cause obviously, if someone's negative every day, like, guy, your life cannot suck every single day. But
Right.
opposite end, like, it's not unicorns and rainbows every day, right?
Right.
Like both, if you're like 100% each way, I think there's something mentally wrong with you, right?
Right.
So how do you like make that balance?
I think it's, a lot of times people, you've heard the line like, I'm not being a pessimist, I'm being a realist.
Yeah,
And that always really bothers
yeah.
me because I think, how come the pessimists get to own being real? Like you can be an optimist and be real too. And so I think, I don't think you want to wear rose colored glasses to the point where you're not being true and clear to what's really happening. I think having the balance though in approaching situations and saying life sucks sometimes. Life can be really hard, but if you think of it as a journey of learning and growth, then hopefully you can say that really, really hurt, or this did not work out the way that I was hoping. What once I recover from the pain of what happened, what can I take away to help me become a better person? And so I think that's sort of how I approach it. I think the people who are always negative, my husband's perspective used to be if I approach something thinking the worst is going to happen, then I'm not going to be let down. And my approach is, or you go after it thinking the best is going to happen, but knowing if it doesn't, you're still going to be okay.
Yeah.
Life can be hard. That's life.
Mm.
But life can also be beautiful and joyful. And I think if you're too mired down in the negative all the time, then you don't even notice when things are beautiful. So I think it's approaching life from a perspective of learning. And you can either learn by, you can be optimistic that, this is going to be hard sometimes. But that's where I kind of go back to the whole resilience idea. Like, don't ignore the fact that life is hard, but just say, okay, what can I learn from this and how can I grow?
What's that thing they say? Like, if you think the universe is lined up to take care of you, it will. Think the universe is lined up to screw you over, it will.
I think that's true because I think, and the most simple analogy that is extremely overused is your glass half empty or half full? How, like, the lens through which you view the universe colors the universe for you. And I think that's how it's all about how you look. It's perspective, right? It's how you look at it. And if you can find the beauty and you can find the learning and the growth and the vulnerability and view those things as opportunities to become a better person and a more whole person and give back to your community and things like that versus thinking everybody's out to get you and the world is stacked against you. It's really just, I think, how you look at it.
Do you remember this meme? What's the wine that's like a kind of like a yellow color? Is that Chardonnay?
The white,
I think it's white yellow color. So there's a meme. There's a glass of wine. It was like a yellow color,
yeah,
and the thing was, is this half full or half empty? Like people with no optimistic perspectives, the answer was this is COVID. That's a glass of half piss, full of piss.
I like that. I haven't seen that. That's
Yeah,
funny.
no
Yeah.
COVID, yeah.
Yeah. That's great.
So how do you take care of yourself, either physically, mentally, spiritually? Like, how do you make sure you take time to do that? Because a lot of people don't do that now.
That's a good question. I would say I don't do it enough, but I'm intentional and mindful about the fact that it's important. I think um, balance is really important. Eating well has always been important to me. That's how I was sort of raised. And so it was sort of foundational to that. Trying to find opportunities to be kind to myself, I think is really important too. So a word that means a lot to me is grace. So being great, giving myself grace, giving you grace, and just through the act of practicing intentional grace and gratitude, I feel healthier as a person. I feel more balanced, if that makes sense. I love, nature, fresh air, spending time with friends. I'm very social. But trying to make sure that I make time for just myself, just to think and kind of work through what's in my mind and things like that too.
Why do you think so many of us, like, give others grace? We like take extra care, like, care about people's feelings, how they care of that stuff. But then when it comes to your own individual self, you're unkind. You say stuff to yourself that you wouldn't say to anyone else. Why do you think a lot of people like that?
Well, I mean, I think we all have our own reasons why. And I think we all have ego and we all, I think it's really easy to beat up on ourselves because there's nobody standing up for us. You can't get away with mistreating other people without somebody calling you out, but you can mistreat yourself and no one's going to, no one's even going to catch you because a lot of it's just internal dialogue. So I think that I've got two youngish children. I have one in college and one that will be soon. And I'm always constantly saying when they're hard on themselves, would you ever talk to somebody else the way that you talk to yourself? And it's like, no, of course not. But it's hard because I think we're used to beating ourselves up. And you think when we're really little, we're innocent and we don't have that sense of kind of self, that ego. But the older we get, when we hear things externally or there's all this, I mean, you think about media and marketing and all these messages and how you internalize all of that and you don't really process that necessarily with other people. I think all of that just kind of starts to weigh down in it and makes it harder to give yourself a break.
The inner critic that we all have, like, on one hand, I think it's bad because, like, you can only hear, your voice saying, Jason, you're a failure. Jason, you're not doing this right. Jason, get together.
Mhm.
The other hand, like, it can be like a motive factor. It can be like kind of motivate to you, right? So how do you like balance the two and control your inner voice, so to speak?
Gosh, if we knew the answer to that, I'd probably be making a lot more money than I am. I can only share what I try to work on with my son. My son has anxiety and has forever, and he's on medication and he does a bunch of other exercise and things like that. But I think it's, one of the things I think is important is when you do kind of hear that the negative voice really kind of coming through stronger and you're not really balancing it, is to say, but is this true? Is what I'm saying to myself, is this true? And I think a lot of times you're going to find that it's not
Yeah.
true, and I think I recently read a book and I thought that this was a really neat perspective that there, when our minds never stop during the day, they're just racing. It's, there's all these, meditations that are supposed to calm your minds. But I think at the end of the day, you can never shut it off. But what you can say is, I'm having thoughts. Are these thoughts helpful? And if they're not, then you have to make the decision what you're going to do with them. Am I going to keep listening to them? There's all these thoughts running through my head. Maybe they're, mean about myself. Maybe they're, gossip about somebody else. But to say, is this helpful? Are these thoughts helping me? And I just thought that was such a great exercise, like such a good prompt to just continue. And I press that on my son, my daughter, my husband, my coworkers. Like, we're always going to have thoughts. Are they helpful? And if they're not, then you've got to do what you can to try to like orient yourself towards thoughts that are, more productive and helpful and healthy.
You're right. I don't think people realize that our brain never actually shuts down, right? Even at nighttime, it's doing something, right? Either dreaming, REM sleep, repairing itself. Like, our
Never.
brains function 24/7.
No, the computer, you can shut it down.
Yeah.
I never do. I probably should at some point, but you can shut down a computer, but your mind is the most powerful computer. And you don't, it runs nonstop. So,
Yeah. And so you used to be a journalist, correct?
Mhm.
Were you like a small time news station? How'd that come about? Like
Um,
TV news or?
Yep. So I started out in TV news in a small market down in Medford, Oregon. It was the NBC affiliate down there. I worked there all through college as an intern and then got hired on full time. And then the year after I graduated high school, I got a job here in Seattle as an overnight news producer and worked up to being an executive producer. I was there for about 6 years, and then I left the industry.
That's the degrees in journalism.
Yeah, broadcasting.
Okay. And you did that for 6 years.
Mhm.
And you just left because you found something better to do, or you're tired of the industry, or
I left because I got tired of telling terrible stories.
okay,
Like and I'm not saying that all news is bad, but most news is bad. And it just in the way when you think about TV news. And there's these horrible lines that they, like it bleeds, it leads. And like the bigger the tragedy, the more people we know would watch our show. And there are so many talented, wonderful people working in that industry. But there's a little bit of a reality to it, which
yeah.
is that negative news attracts more attention. So, I think I got to the point where I wanted to continue to be a storyteller, but I wanted to tell stories a little bit more on my terms and tell stories of really wonderful things. And so I left news and I went to Pacific Science Center here in Seattle, and I was there for 10 years, and that was a wonderful experience helping tell positive stories and get people excited about science.
So I know a lot of people complain like the news doesn't tell my story, the news doesn't talk about this. But there's so much stuff going on, right? That's good, bad, like stuff like right now, the stuff in Gaza, Ukraine,
Mhm.
the Baltimore Bridge collapsing,
Mhm.
that's like homelessness in different places, and because
Yeah.
there's a good news story. The news is only like 30 minutes long, not counting commercials and weather and stuff. Like I can imagine how the people who's in charge of chick picking what to choose, besides the leader bleeds thing,
Yeah.
how do you decide? It's like whatever you decide, you're gonna piss someone off. Some demographics gonna be mad at you.
Yeah. Well, and that happens. And the thing is and you, I don't know how much you're following this, but journalists are being laid off in droves right now. I mean, you look at like TechCrunch and some of the other major publications out there are, their newsrooms are almost empty. So I think I left the industry in 2006. So even between 2006 and now it is so dramatically changed. I mean, back when I was in the industry, we didn't have social media. So news was on at a certain time of day. People would set their clocks by it, right? It's sort of the same idea of like, well, if I want to get the news, then in the morning I go get my newspaper off the front porch. That's my first opportunity to see what happened overnight. And then, maybe I watch the morning news. The news is sometimes on at noon, and then I've got the evening news, and then I have the late news. And in between there was no way to find out what was going on in the world. Like people were just starting to publish content online. But I think what's happened since then is news has become so incredibly fractional. You think about like there's the three main cable networks that run over 24 hours a day of the news cycle no longer ends, and then you've got all these other niche publications and websites and podcasts and blogs that are all kind of pushing out their own content on their own terms and all that kind of stuff. So I think where there's a challenge is um, creating balance so that people are able to access enough information to get a holistic perspective on a problem. I think that's one area right now where people have sort of their favorite news outlets, and if that's the only place that they're going to go, then they're missing out on other perspectives, which I think are really important part of what journalism was supposed to be about. So I think to your point of like, how do you pick? I think that because there are so many sort of narrow publications that are targeted to demographics, a lot of times they kind of are delivering the content that they think that the demographic is going to want to know, right? And then that they might be missing kind of the other side of the story, which I think is a big problem.
I think another challenge too is I think it's a good thing and a bad thing. Like for example, this morning the Baltimore Bridge collapse.
Mhm.
Within minutes on TikTok, hundreds of news people on TikTok will give them their take on it, right?
Yeah,
I mean, like these so-called wannabe journalism, right?
right.
And so people go that for news, right? There's a YouTube, there's all this stuff out there, like and like yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot, and it's hard because I think there's no vetting anymore. Which
No.
on one hand is it's nice that more people can create content, and I think you think about sometimes there's these huge events that affect the world and these big uprisings and even thinking about what's happening in the Middle East and that because people are sort of like citizen journalists, they're able to capture kind of these moments in time that perhaps journalists would not have had access to. So I think that there's a place for it too. But at the same time, then you think about, when like using the Baltimore Bridge example, like conspiracy theories might be coming out,
Oh,
whether it was
already.
terrorism related,
Yeah, it's
right?
like 4 or
And
5 people saying it was a
right,
bomb or all that kind of
right,
crazy stuff.
yeah, right, or like speculation of like, well, I think I saw 30 cars go into the river, right? And so I think it's very challenging to figure out how to navigate that from just a information sharing perspective, so that it's not harmful, because it is important to have those platforms for people to share. But I don't think people necessarily always know how to vet anymore, sort of what's legit and what's not. It's very hard to do.
I know way back in the day, Walter Cronkite, he could have said the moon is made of blue cheese and people believed him because he just had that kind of,
Yeah.
integrity.
Yep.
Like, do you think we ever get back to the point? Because now I've seen like with people like, I know people call CNN Clown News Network,
Yep.
they probably call Fox. Do you think we'll get back to a day where like there'll be a news person or like, okay, we trust this person, or those days are long gone?
That's a good question. I think that there will be people. Um, I would hope there'll always be people who are trusted. I think it's becoming so much more segmented I mean, I think that there are people, as it relates to technology, for example, that maybe are going to be more trusted to kind of be a voice that understands technology and kind of where that's going. I think the days of like the generalists, like a Walter Cronkite, I think are I unfortunately I think I don't know that we're going to see any more of those.
Now, I might be mixing this up. Of course, for nowadays, if it's AI or something, but I remember like about a couple months ago, they had on summer show where like all these different news stations right across the country, like maybe 100 of them, they said the same thing, like the same words for a story, right? Like does ABC or NBC or like tell local news stations here's a script to say, or do news stations get just have like kind of leeway to say that?
It's both.
Okay,
So I think there are a lot of like the Associated Press and Reuters provide like a subscription news service. So television stations, radio stations, and newspapers can subscribe to that service where they'll get like a feed of content every day that if they want to go through and say, oh, here's a story we want to use, here's the script, they have the choice of either using the script that was provided or they can rewrite it themselves.
yeah, I remember seeing that. Like I was kind of scared, like it just appeared like there was some agency in the sky was like telling all these news people exactly what to say, right? Like kind of like propaganda stuff,
Yeah.
right? It was not a good look.
No, no, yes, no, and typically I think smaller markets tend to be more likely to just kind of lift and like read whatever's given to them, just because they're under resourced,
Mhm.
or they might be having to fill 30 minutes and they've got one producer and no writers
Yeah.
and that kind of stuff. But yeah.
So, do you think? Why do you think all these people got laid off? Because AI's come in, or just like lack of ad revenue, or different factors?
Oh, I think it's all of it. I think that the financial model for journalism is for selling content is changing, and I think I think that finding, it's been a little bit of a slow. I would say there's been a little bit of this kind of been this bleed that's been happening for the last probably 15, 20 years, where the it's people are less interested in us maybe paying for some of that content, and now there's so many other ways to get access to the content without having to pay for it. Or, people are, cutting clips and sharing the information through other channels that I think it's harder to make the case, I think, in many cases to pay for it. Ad revenue is way, way, way down. Because it's just the market, the attention is so segmented now. And you think back to like, the days of NBC Nightly News and CBS, and you knew that there were only 3 stations that were gonna be doing news that
And
night.
only like 30
So
minutes a day, too, right?
yeah, and so there was a premium on those spots. People paid a lot of money to advertise in those spots. That's not the world we live in
Now you can
anymore.
advertise on Skim News, 1440, Access
Yeah,
News, all this BBC. There's
yeah,
so many.
yeah, yeah, and so I think you combine that with just all the different ways that people, consume content, and I think it's the advertising piece is really, really, really tough.
So let's say someone's out there in college, either junior or senior, they're going to degree in journalism. what would you advise them to be? Would you like, hey, change degrees, don't be a journalist, or or
No, it's I would say that just think about what kind of stories you want to tell and what are the different ways that you can tell them. So I think that there are a lot of really creative ways that you can be a journalist now that you couldn't be before. I'll reference my son again just because he is a junior and his minor is journalism. Is he produces really great content on his own. Like, why don't you look at getting that syndicated, or look at other ways that you can distribute or sell your content. I think it's important to think about all the different mediums too that there are now for telling stories. So obviously this is one. There's video. There's um, obviously written. Like there's just a lot of different ways to tell your story. So I think just figuring out what that looks like and just being open, I think, to exploring different paths. I think that storytelling is always going to be important. I don't think AI will ever replace the value of like a human told story. But I think it is important to look at how to leverage AI too, and not pretend like, we don't need that because it's here. So,
yeah. So it's talking about storytelling, like talking about startups. A lot of startup founders fail, I believe, because they can't figure out how to be a great storyteller,
right.
right? Like, of course, like introverted and you're not a good speaker, but you still have to overcome that, right?
Yeah.
Like, how besides getting up and talking every day, is there any ways that I become a great storyteller?
Well, I think one of the things that we do when we start working with startups to help them figure out how to either raise money or attract talent or things like that is make sure that their story is. So I think before you talk about like where are you going to tell your story or becoming a better speaker is like what is the story that you're telling, and how do you make sure that you're connecting kind of your mission and what you're providing with the people who need it or want it in a way that is compelling to them. So I think just figuring out how to distill your story in a really clear way is the first step, and making sure that a lot of the founders we work with are scientists, and they're brilliant, brilliant scientists who've been building this technology or innovating in science for all this time, and they know all these things that most people are never going to understand. And I think it's critically important to help them, one, first of all, understand that what the recipient or the receiver of your story, it's really important to put yourself in the perspective of them and what it is that's important to them, and what's making their life hard, or like how can you make their life better, and making sure that one, that your story can be told in a way that resonates on their level at the to what's most important to them. And then you get into how to tell it. And I think not everybody is natural talking with other people, and I think that's okay. And I think now, there's still value in the written word, and I think there's value in, you know, even just like podcasts and opportunities like that. So a lot of times, what we'll do with founders who know that they need to do more of that kind of stuff but don't feel comfortable is identify a little bit of like opportunities that are a little bit more of a softball, we would say. So podcasts that maybe don't have a huge audience necessarily, or are, the podcasts are so within their niche that you're not going to get a bunch of questions that you're afraid to answer, that you feel really comfortable, you feel very confident what you know. We do a lot to prepare them, do some practicing, things like that. And then kind of think of those as like incremental steps towards like a larger stage.
I still remember this. Like, remember back the day when Apple came with the iPod, I think
Mhm.
there was other iPods out there that are way, way better, right? But all these other other musical devices, like we have 3.2 bandwidth, 19.7 this, all these
Yeah,
numbers and stuff, technical stuff. Steve Jobs, here's 1,000 songs in your pocket.
that's exactly.
And that was it, right?
That's it. Nobody even knows what those other things mean,
No,
right? But I know that I want to have as much music as I can on mine. That's the one I want.
something as simple as that.
Yeah.
And like you said, too many like scientists and technical people, software developers, like we have blank bandwidth, we have XX storage. Like no one cares about that.
No, they want to know that you have a treatment that might help them treat their cancer.
Mhm.
They want to know that you have something that will get you where you need to go faster, will save you money on your gas, will, you know what I mean? It's like very basic things that are important to how we all live and thrive. They want to be able to live well, play well, work well, feel well. Connect what you're doing back to kind of those core ideas, and you're much more likely to get buy-in.
So storytelling important. Like, obviously, if you're raising funds for a startup, you want to be in front of the right investors, right? Like, suppose, like, I'm raising a HR tech B2B, a
Hmm.
pre-seed. I'm not, hopefully, I'm smart enough not to go reach out to a B round investors who invest in consumer tech, right?
Right.
But how do you like make sure people tell the right story to the right crowd, so to speak?
Yeah. So the way that we approach it, which I think will make sense, is first start with who is the audience, and in your case, is an example, kind of who are what's the profile of somebody who'd be most likely to want to invest in what you're doing. So getting really clear on what are the problems that you're solving, who's experiencing those problems, and who's investing in solutions for those problems. And I think sometimes we have founders that end up it ends up being smarter to find a strategic investor or somebody who's already doing work in that space, who can kind of say, like, I already understand this landscape, I can also help you, more than financially, but also kind of understanding kind of your path to market and things like that. So I think where we typically would begin is like, what is kind of what makes you different, what are the problems you're solving, who's really suffering these problems, and what do they need to, we always ask this, what do you think they need to hear and see in order to want to participate in whatever it is that you have to offer. And a lot of times it means you have to go ask. I mean, it usually always does, right? You need to actually go talk to them and test it out with them and say, like, I what are the problems that, you as a small business leader, when it comes to HR, what are your biggest pain points? And like, what does that look like for you? And if you had a solution that could fix one of these pain points, is that something that you would, be interested in? And that's typically how we would start. And then I think when it comes to the investment side, yeah, is just kind of taking what you've learned and then bringing that to the potential types of, obviously there's going to be a lot of investors that are not going to be interested in what you're doing, but finding the ones that would be.
How about this? Like, I know a lot of people, they're good at, hey, Mary Jane, how can I help you? Or what do you need help with? That kind of stuff. Like, but we're not good at asking for help. Or when somebody asks us, hey, Jason, what do you need? Like, I don't know. Like, why are we so not able to like accept help or ask for help?
I think there's a few. One, I would say sometimes you might not even know what kind of help you need.
Yeah.
I think is part of the issue, right? And so I think, which is a great exercise, just to spend time sometimes thinking about when you're in those moments of like, oh, I'm really struggling right now with this. Is just saying, like, if I could have any kind of help I need, what would it be? Like, what would help me get through this situation? I think the other one is that there's a sense of, if you're asking for help, that maybe you don't have what it takes.
But like, it's ego or
Yeah,
pride.
it's ego, and I think and it's fear, and I think it's probably an insecurity too. And I think something that, though, is the counterpoint to that is that people need to see vulnerability, and
Yeah.
they need to see authenticity, and they need to see that you are honest with yourself and that you're going to be honest with me. Because if you say that you don't need any help, that you've got it all figured out, I'm going to call bullshit on you,
Yeah.
right? And no one's going to
Yeah.
no one wants to be like,
No.
because that's not real. It's like, and people investors don't want to invest in people like that. They want to invest in people who are confident in what they know, and clearly can demonstrate that they have skill and they have talent and they have drive and a focus and a commitment. But they also want a founder who'll say to them, but this is an area where I'm struggling a little bit and I could use some help. Because if you can't identify where you have your weak spots, you're not going to make it, right? So I think it's important. It's incredibly important to be able to be honest about that. But I do think ego and a fear of, well, if I don't come off like I have it all together, then I'm not going to be, investable.
Let's switch to your time. The thing's called Pacific Science Center.
Mhm.
I've been there a couple of times. Can you talk about your role there and what it does there?
Yeah. So Pacific Science Center, which for people in the area is basically under the arches at the base of the Space Needle, right in the Seattle Center. It was founded as part of the World's Fair in the early 1960s, and is one of the most attended, most highly regarded science education institutions in the country. It's considered informal science education, so it's not like the classroom
And when you
curriculum.
say science, you mean all kinds of science, biology, like
All
math
of it.
stuff,
Yeah, and I
everything.
mean STEM really. So it's
Damn,
it's
okay.
it's really science, technology, engineering, math. They bring in art sometimes, but it's really about the it's really about first fostering curiosity and making science accessible. And when I mean accessible, you might have heard like not all scientists wear lab coats. And this idea of like, if you're curious or interested in learning more about like the world and the natural world and math and science and things like that, that there are multiple career paths that don't require you to go get a PhD or even a master's, or, in many cases, you don't even have to have a bachelor's. There's all kinds of different kinds of skilled training you can get. But science is inherently intimidating to a lot of people. And so kind of the mission of the Science Center was to make science feel approachable, exciting, interesting, and foster curiosity. I mean, I think curiosity is kind of where it all starts, right? If you're not a curious person, you're really missing out. So I think that's really what the mission was. It has hands-on exhibits throughout the Science Center that focuses on all kind of different areas of science. They have a butterfly house, which is really spectacular, full of tropical butterflies. They have IMAX movies that, do documentary style stuff. And then they also do, a lot of people don't know, they do hands-on science education programs in schools. So they have vans that are full of traveling exhibits and teachers that go out to schools and do big assemblies and get kids all excited about science. And then they also do some public affairs related stuff to basically try to kind of make sure that the legislator is investing appropriately in, STEM education in the schools, and really advocating for this idea of like just judging somebody's, the performance based on test scores is not an indicator of future careers in science. And I think it's a really unfortunate part of kind of the way our school systems are set up right now because my husband's a teacher, so and we grew up with a family of teachers. But teachers many times have to teach to tests. And so what happens by that point is you lose the opportunity to really inspire kids. And that's kind of what the role of the Science Center is, really to try to create that inspiration and give young people a sense of confidence that they can do it. So yeah, so that's the first part of your question. Quickly, the second part, I was there. I started off in marketing, and then as like a marketing manager, and I became the vice president of marketing and communications. So oversaw kind of multiple aspects of the communications.
So is this just for like school age kids, or is like everyone from 5 to 95, or
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. So, it's really for all ages. There's the like we would have members that were lifelong members that started coming when they were kids, and then now they have their own kids and their own grandkids, and they still come back. So there's definitely programming and exhibits that are tailored towards different age groups, but there are opportunities for all ages to discover. And then they do events like in the community science and society related events. I think one part of the Science Center that I was really passionate about that actually carried into my career after that is this idea of having a basic literacy around science is critically important to be able to make informed decisions about how you're going to vote and how you're going to invest your time and your money, because a lot of the biggest issues facing our world today, if you have at least a basic understanding of science or how to go about finding information to learn about, you think about issues related to the environment, about global health, about the economy. There's all of these major issues that are affecting our world, that if you at least have a basic scientific understanding or know how to seek information that's credible, you're going to be able to make informed decisions. And so a big part of the Science Center is fostering science and society dialogues, where it encourages people to have healthy discourse around kind of some of the scientific considerations as it relates to like major issues facing the world.
now are they a nonprofit?
They are.
Okay,
Mhm.
and so I guess have to go fundraise and get grants all the time.
Yep.
But they've been around for a while. I'm sure they have a steady stream of funders that take care of them all the time.
Well, it's I think that those kinds of institutions, so they'd be kind of in the same category. It was like Museum of History, Museum of Flight, the aquarium are these sort of like nonprofit destination attractions. It's always a really tricky balance between earned income, which is like people buying tickets at the gate or buying an IMAX movie, and contributed income. And I think there are some institutions that are very fortunate to have huge endowments. I haven't been at the Science Center for several years, so I can't speak to their current financial makeup, but I know it was always a challenge to make sure that you really need to have those endowments and kind of those long-term funders that help you weather the times when maybe attendance for an exhibit is low or, something happens and, a movie doesn't do well and things like that. You need to have that resilience to be able to weather those kind of ups and downs.
So I know with a S2s PR, y'all focus on life science, biotech, climate tech. Is that because you went there and convinced them to start doing that stuff, or were they already doing that before you got there?
So when I joined the agency, it's been about 6 years. It was still in its infancy, and the focus at that point was really primarily in life sciences, just because that was sort of where the opportunity at the time was, and that there were already Eric, my colleague, already had some strong relationships with life science startups that needed help. And then we really just said our what gets us excited is working with founders who are doing impactful things. It doesn't have to be in the life sciences. So, we've worked across ed tech, climate tech, robotics and space, like all kinds of really interesting things. It'd probably be a lot easier if we would just pick one because it's like going to science class every day to understand it. But yeah, we work across kind of all areas. It just so happens it ends up being most of it is kind of in the life sciences biotech because here in Seattle, there's a lot of that going on.
So when I think of life science, biotech, I think of like moonshots, right? Like cure disease, make something better. But is it like any startups that are like doing something like way smaller, or they're all
Mm.
moonshots?
No, I mean, I think I would say a lot of them are working on aspects of kind of a big, none of them are themselves necessarily right now working on the moonshot, but they're working on underlying technology that is going to enable, through other companies or through partners and things like that to be able to achieve like pretty remarkable things. But we also, one of the companies we work with has a wearable, a medical grade patch that you wear on your chest that can collect like 30 different biometrics at one time, which is like extraordinary. And they started off with fewer and they continue to add more capabilities to it. And they're now being used by, tens of thousands of patients, across the world. That's pretty impactful. So it's going to really transform the way, like how, a huge issue in hospitals is massive workforce shortages, as I'm sure you know, like huge nursing shortages, major burnout. And this patch makes it so nurses don't have to come in 4 to 6 times a day and take your vitals. They're being continuously monitored from like a central command center where you can have hundreds of patients that are all being monitored at the same time. So it's like that's not necessarily a moonshot, but I would say with scale and adoption, that will transform the way patients are cared for.
Do you have something like a science that's on your staff, or like someone just comes in and the scientist may say this is a good idea in theory, but until we figure out how to do hyperdrive through space, this isn't going to work right. Like someone like that, like maybe okay, this is good in vision, all it's a good theory, but science is like 2,000 years away from even accomplishing this.
Um, so I would say by the time people come to us, they've already vetted their idea enough.
Okay.
But I do think it's one of the things that we do is we ask those hard questions, like how much validation do you have? Who's on your team? Who else is kind of in this space? So I think we have sort of some questions depending on whoever it is to kind of vet the kind of the feasibility of it. But typically by the time they're ready to come to us, because we do public relations, um, they likely have already raised a little bit of money or have enough of either a proof of concept or minimum viable product or something where they're ready to tell people because they want to raise money, right? So I think typically, or a lot of times their board will say, okay, it's time for you to get PR. So I think that there's some vetting
Okay.
and some hurdles they've already crossed before they come to us.
So what if someone comes to you, like there's three founders, none of them have a science background, but they have like maybe they're trying to cure some kind of disease, right? With some kind of tech, but they're great storytellers. They convince these investors to invest in them, but the tech's like it's kind of sketchy, right?
Yep.
But how do you work that? Do you have to have like a science background to have a science tech startup, or is this like all comers, so to speak?
That's a good question. So I'll answer it two ways. One, I don't think we've ever had anybody come to us with a science, like a technology or science based product or service that doesn't have that background, or have somebody on their team that does. With that said, we have had people come to us wanting us to represent them, and we have said no because we did not believe in either the product or the team. So we have to feel like we can be convinced before we're going to go over there and try to convince somebody else. So we have said no, and said this just isn't the right fit for us if we didn't feel like, one, that the technology was viable, or two, that the team had what they needed to have in order to be successful.
And are you still with the King County, Seattle, I think Salvation Army, or that's in the past?
Yeah, I'm not an active board member right now, just frankly, just because I just got kind of thin on time. So when I left Pacific Science Center, I went into for profit, and it was really, its service is very important to me, and giving back and being, showing generosity. And I needed to find another outlet where I could do that. And my mom, when she was a young 18-year-old mom, was going through a really hard time. The Salvation Army essentially saved her. And so I had an appreciation for what they do, and how they give back to the community. And so I was invited to join the communications committee. And then from that, I was asked to be on their board. And I did that for about 5 years, and I'm still a volunteer. But they they're very quiet about what they do. It's part of sort of who they are as a culture. But I think that people would be surprised to know how much impact they have in our community with helping, domestic violence victims, and, the homeless population, and, emergency response and things like that.
So, Chris, you have a saying, clarity and authenticity build trust and strengthen relationships and foster success. Can you
Yeah.
talk about that and where that came from?
Yeah. So my name is Crystal Clarity, which for working in communications has always been a talking, like, people always ask, like, what's the story with your name? And so I'll bring it back to that, because for me that has become a big part of who I am and my story. So my name is Crystal Joy Clarity. I had hippie parents, and that's my name. They did not have the same last name. They picked that last name just for me. And growing up as a young person, I kind of felt embarrassed about it. But then as I moved into a career in communications, I really sort of embraced it. And I think because it's my last name, I really learned about what clarity means. And to me, I think that every day I seek clarity, either in, helping my clients' stories be told in a clear way, to making sure that I'm being clear with you, and that if I'm not clear on what you're saying, that I ask for more. Right. Though. So I think when there's a lack of clarity, people's feelings get hurt, people make assumptions. Things, it's not efficient, because you're kind of thinking maybe you're doing what I told you to do, but you're not totally sure. So I think I'm very inspired by the power of clarity to help people be more successful. So I've really taken that as kind of like a word that really means a lot to me. And I really focus my work on making sure that I'm being as clear as I can be. And that if I'm not clear on what I'm hearing from others, that I do what I can to try to bring more clarity. So that's the clarity piece. And the authenticity is, I think it's such a buzzword. I should probably take that off. But I think just this idea of, like, if we can both show up and be real and be true, it's okay if we make mistakes, and it's okay if we don't agree. But if we're showing up as our true selves, and can trust each other enough to let ourselves be our true selves, then I think we can do a lot more together and have a lot bigger impact in the world.
So, your parents gave you a different last name from them?
Yeah.
I had no clue you do that. You do that.
Uh, I can't tell you how many people have asked me or said I didn't think that was even legal.
Yeah.
But yeah, they did it before it was a thing. I think a lot of people change their names now. This is
Yeah.
in the 70s. And yeah, just two hippies that,
They tell you a reason why they want you to have a different name, just like want to be different or
Well, first of all, they were not married,
okay.
so they would have had to fight over who's
Yeah.
which one of them.
Mhm.
They weren't particularly happy with either of their last names, and
Okay.
they again, I just can't overemphasize they were just total hippies.
Yeah.
So,
That's definitely a good story to tell.
yeah, so yeah, um, yeah,
That's amazing. So next, your CEO is gonna do something in April called Fundamentals of Startups.
yeah,
Can you talk about that?
yeah. So this is a commotion at UW. So it's just a great, Eric Shudisky is the founder of our company. Eric is also a former journalist. He worked in TV news in major markets all over the country and ended his TV career here in Seattle because the way that the TV industry works is you kind of only stay in one place for so long and then you have to move to the next market. And I think he liked it here and he wanted to settle down, so he moved into the PR side. So I think Eric brings a great perspective to these lunch and learns. This is a virtual or in person. So people can either, if you're close by, you can go to UW or you can do it online. But it just, the fundamentals, a lot of times people are intimidated by PR and they don't know where to start. And I think that, even for early stage founders who don't have a budget yet to spend on PR, there's just some of those fundamental things to consider. How and when to use social media, what makes a good media story? If you're going to email a reporter at, say, GeekWire, what should you put in your email? When is the right time to do that? How do you know that you have a story? How do you turn what you have into a story? Kind of some of those just basic fundamentals. So I think that for people that are just kind of not really sure where to start, it'll be a great talk.
So earlier, I think yesterday you did a post on LinkedIn where you got some kind of gift and they said you had to give half the gift away or something like that. Can you
Yeah.
tell that story?
Yeah. So it was a post about generosity. And generosity is, I talked a little bit about service, and we can talk more about that if you want to later. But I think, in terms of like optimism is something that's incredibly important to me. I think service is something that is really, really important to me, and also generosity. And I think the post about generosity was actually inspired by a really fantastic TED talk that was released recently by Chris Anderson, who is the founder of TED, and he has a new book out called Infectious Generosity. And the whole idea of it is that generosity is viral. And if people are giving to others, it inspires those people then to turn to give as well because they're motivated and inspired by what's happened. So um, the post talks a little bit about more of kind of some of the research behind um, people who are generous are more like, in the workplace are more likely to get raises. They're more likely to get promotions. They're more likely to have fulfilling work. I mean, there's all these things that are like not a surprise, right? But the story that I used is that we have a friend in our family who was really generous with giving our family a gift, but the gift had a string attached, and the string was you have to give at least half of the gift away. And so the story I shared on LinkedIn was that we spent time with our kids and really thinking through how do we want to give half of this gift away. And we ultimately decided to surprise a few friends. And then we let our kids pick a couple of charities, but we made them do the research and, it's got to be a cause that's important to you. It had to be a nonprofit. And then, so that's how we gifted it. And at the end of the day, we felt more joy from the exercise of giving half of it away than we did with spending the part we kept. And that was exactly the intention of the person that gave us the gift. So, yeah.
So why did you decide to put this on LinkedIn? Because I know some people say, that's a personal story. That's not
Mhm.
LinkedIn. It's not Facebook. Personally, I think post photo how you want to on LinkedIn, right? It's your LinkedIn, right?
Yep.
But why did you feel person moved to like share that story?
Because because generosity is not something that is just part of our personal lives. Generosity should be part of all of our lives in every way. We should be generous in everything we do. And I think that trying to separate professional from personal, we're not two people, we're one person, right? We have a personal life and we have a professional life. And There's a lot to be gained by learning about some of these sort of like how do these big values apply in our lives. And so I led with that personal story. I didn't include any of the details, obviously, about what we received or from who or any of that kind of stuff. But I wanted to use that because a lot of times those kind of stories make people want to keep reading, right? Because it's like, wow, this is interesting. And then you kind of, where's this going to go? And to me, where it went was there are things that we can do professionally every single day to be more generous that don't take more time, don't cost any money, that can help us be better business leaders, be better colleagues, be better community leaders. And that is kind of, I think, the message I wanted to give is, and I think being generous with what you know, sharing what you know with other people is really important. And being present and giving grace to your team members and things like that. So that was kind of the reason I included it on Facebook or on
So
LinkedIn.
what does it mean to you to be a lifelong learner, and how do you make sure you continue to be a lifelong learner?
Yeah. So to me, being a lifelong learner kind of goes back to some of the stuff we talked about earlier of if you think you know it all, then you're done growing and you've kind of lost the point at that point, I think. So I think back to that story I shared about at the Science Center, that idea of like fostering intellectual curiosity. I think that, we are here to learn until the day that we die. And if we stop learning at any point, then we're really missing out on the whole point. So I think for me, what that means and how I apply that is I try to be a really good listener. I try to be really open to the idea that I might have a strong opinion about something, but I definitely don't have all the answers. And being humble enough to be willing to say, okay, my opinion has changed because of something I learned. And so I consume news, voraciously. I listen to podcasts all the time. I try to listen to books when I have time, but I also just try to do a lot of just listening and kind of processing what I'm hearing.
What's something you have not learned yet that you want to learn?
Oh,
Either learn in general or something you want, like maybe learn the piano or guitar,
that's a great
or
question.
maybe learn the code, like learn anything.
That's a great question. So this year I decided I always like, do you do New Year's resolutions?
Not anymore. I don't.
Okay. So I don't need,
I never, you know,
because you never follow
no,
through, right?
no.
Yeah. So this year I said, well, I'm not going to even pretend to do them. But what I am going to do is I'm going to decide two things that I want to learn this year, one professional, one personal. And I gave myself like a month to think about what those things would be. And the cool thing now is, as you know, is like there's a never ending source of content now. Like you want to learn how to do some new skill, go find a YouTube video for
Yep.
that or take a digital course, or there's just so many awesome ways now to learn. So what I've decided is for my kind of more professional focus is to become a stronger digital content creator. So like I love like I think it's great that you do this podcast. I
Thank
think
you.
it's spectacular. So I don't know yet what that's going to look like. I don't know if it's going to end up being more like long form written content, or I'm going to try to like practice doing some video type content and kind of see. But I'm doing a lot of like listening to books about people who've been really successful in creating YouTube content and things like that. So that's one side. And then personally, I think it's going to be gardening
Okay.
because I know like where I feel good
Uh-huh.
when it's the weekends and I have nothing going on. I love just like getting zen in the garden.
Like any certain fruit or vegetable or
Yeah, so my dad is a prolific organic gardener, and so I kind of have some basic understanding of how to garden and enough literacy to know how to go learn more. I think probably vegetables. It's hard to grow them here. There's some that could do well, but like I cannot get my tomatoes to survive. They all get brown before they
yeah.
get ripe. So I don't know. I'm still kind of deciding, but so that's kind of my new approach is maybe each year I come up with one thing that'll help me more professionally, one thing that'll help me more personally, and try to go learn about those things.
So you see you have one kid in college now, right?
Yeah.
And how old is the next one?
My daughter is 16. She's a sophomore in high
Okay.
school.
Total hypothetical situation. Suppose it's your daughter's senior year in high school, and she says, Mom, Dad, I wanted to get a degree, we'll say, engineering.
Mhm.
Instead of you spend all this money for me, here's my plan to learn everything on YouTube University, free online schools. I learned the same knowledge, same everything, all these companies don't need degrees anymore, what would be your reaction?
I think what I would say, first I would want to validate that she doesn't need a degree to go into the field that she wants to. So if she says, this is what I want to do. And I know like, here's all these other people, or, these employers that will hire people that don't have those skills. Or if it's something where she's like, I can do this on my own. I don't need to work for anybody else. So I think I would ask a lot of questions to make sure that she's done
Obviously, yeah.
the research, right?
Yeah.
And then I would just hold her accountable. I mean, I think we try very hard to keep our kids accountable. And that if that's the path that she's going to go down, is just making sure that she is taking action every day towards that goal. But I think we would absolutely be open to it, as long as we felt like she had truly done the research and had the internal motivation to actually do it. That would, I think, probably be my biggest concern.
Yeah. So y'all have, is it a blog or newsletter y'all do? Or
Um,
are they the same thing? A blog, newsletter, basically the same thing, or is it different?
so we have we had a blog. We've had a blog on our website for several years that we maybe post, I don't know, a handful of times a year. We'll write like a longer article. We started doing a newsletter through MailChimp maybe a year and a half ago. And then in the last maybe 8 months or so, have really found that migrating that over to LinkedIn has been really effective. So we do a quarterly newsletter that is kind of on a bigger, like we'll pick a bigger topic and then maybe do like 4 or 5 pieces of content related to the larger topic. We try to pick something timely for kind of what we know the people that are in our industries are kind of dealing with at that time of year. And then in between, we'll do like one digest, like we'll do, it's called the pitch is the newsletter, because the pitch is what you do in PR. And then we'll do one called the fast pitch, which is, kind of in between. So every month we end up with a piece of content, and those are smaller. Those are more like a blog post or something like that.
So does it tend to like educate maybe potential customers? Does it tend to like to reach out to your current customers? What's the overall?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the primary objective, um, on the content side, is to make sure that we're giving some piece of content that's helpful to the people that we're trying to help in our industry. So if it's, an early stage founder, or somebody who maybe isn't, not ready for PR yet, but just wants to kind of learn a little bit more, we want to be a resource and be able to provide content at no cost to help support the community. And we get a lot of, on a day-to-day, we've worked with over 50 startups now. So we kind of know there's like this list of questions that's pretty consistent that we see. And so we use the blog, the newsletter, as a chance to maybe answer some of the questions we know that are pretty consistent across multiple founders. And then, if it turns out to be that somebody says, oh, well, this really resonates with me, I would like more help, then obviously, we appreciate the potential business, interest.
So talk about the process of deciding to move it from like, your own newsletter to LinkedIn. 'Cause a lot of people say, have your own newsletter because you own it, like, of course, LinkedIn is not going to shut down, but if it did shut
Right.
down, or there's something you lose all the followers, like,
Yeah.
but like me, like I've never been, it's been on a list of things to do, like start a newsletter. Like
Yeah.
just never done it. So I have like a LinkedIn newsletter, like over like 8,000 follows on there. A fear is always kind of like, what if like I say something wrong and some person like doesn't like what I say and they close it down, right? So you talk about the process of like deciding why put your company at like such a risk, so to speak, by doing the LinkedIn newsletter.
So I think what we saw as the potential biggest risk is losing kind of that list of email addresses that we owned, right? So I think when we kind of weighed the pros and cons, that I would say that was the con. I think the only other thing is potentially like we were looking at the format, and do we have less control of format if we use LinkedIn? Ultimately decided it was fine. So I think that was the downside. I think we didn't have the same concern maybe about content that like not everybody's going to love what you produce. And so I think we're being that we're kind of come at it as former journalists and work in an industry where we're constantly, having to take that chance of getting some, the media to cover us. There's always a chance of somebody not liking something. But I think where we saw is the upside is, it's a social platform. So it's, within the first day, we launched it with 6 subscribers, and there are 5 people on our team. So you can do the math on that one. And the first day we got over 150 new people, and a lot of them were like second or third degree connections. So we thought, okay,
That's on mine is too. Like probably like 2/3 of mine like second or third degree connections. Yeah.
which is fantastic because how else would you ever reach those
Yeah.
people, right? So I think we weighed the pros and cons of it and felt like, and then the other thing that we did and is, and I think you're doing this too because you offer HR solutions, but it's not for anybody. It's for a very specific, business,
Yeah.
scenario. And people are hungry for content that is really specific to what they need. So I think the more you continue to really, identify with, as a small business owner with 49 or fewer employees, we know these are the very specific things that you are dealing with. We're trying to take that approach too of like, okay, so our ideal reader is the startup, um, probably working with some sort of technology. Maybe they're scientists, and they don't yet have money. They're gonna go raise money soon, but they don't have money to hire PR. So we just try to really think about who that is. And we have seen we've had clients that work in very, very niche science fields that have launched newsletters that are like, there's no question that nobody else is doing a newsletter on that because it is so specific. And they'll get like 2,000 people. That is like their, that's awesome.
That's
Because
very
those are
nice.
people that you want.
So for your second or third connection, you ever like reach out to them, like try to sell them, so to speak, or you just wait for them? Or the approach like more if they want our services, they'll reach out to us.
I do not reach out to
Okay.
them. And I will tell like I will say one of the things that really does irritate me is when somebody will contact me to be a connection and I will think maybe I'd met them, or something and I'll accept and within like a couple minutes I end up getting this like hard sell email
Oh my God.
and then they'd send it
Yeah.
again and I've gotten to the point now where if my first interaction with you is you trying to sell me something, I just disconnect.
And especially they send you like a 10,000 word single space,
Yes.
essay.
And they have no idea what you do.
Like no one's reading this.
No. And they'll treat you like they know. They'll say, "Hey, I took a look at Cavness HR's website and I can see that you need to outsource blah blah blah." I'm like,
Yeah.
"No, I don't.
Yeah.
If you looked at my website, you would know that I don't need, a staffing,
Yeah.
manager or whatever it
Yeah.
might be." So I think it's that is such a turn off. And I think
Me
that
too.
yeah.
That
So
is something over 2 paragraphs. You see me like over 2 paragraphs. It's yeah.
yeah.
It's a deal breaker.
No. Yeah. So I'll just disconnect. So
So I think on y'all's website it says PR with a purpose. What does that even mean? Like, what's your definition of that?
so we are I think it means a couple things. One, it's that we work with companies that we believe in and we believe in the mission of the company. So it needs to be, we the companies we work with are building something that we truly believe is going to make the world a better place. And if we don't believe that that's true, then we would not work with them. So I think we look for really purpose driven, mission oriented companies and then the other piece of that is that I think we're really intentional and purposeful in the work that we do. Um, some agencies, and certainly not all, there are a lot of really wonderful agencies out there, but a lot of agencies um, take more of a templated approach to how they do PR, and that's not how we work. We want to make sure that we're always being creative, that we're coming with energy, with intention to make sure that we're developing strategies that are most effective for whatever the unique kind of opportunity is that you're kind of like building. And we want to make sure that we're not just saying kind of that set it and forget it model. So I think for us it goes both sides.
And y'all across the United States.
Um, we do have clients all over the country, and we actually we had a client in France last year. Interestingly, before COVID, we were only in really like Puget Sound. We did have a couple clients down in Portland and whatever in Spokane, but we said we really value FaceTime. And the irony is then like COVID happened, and it was like well, FaceTime became like phone
Uh-huh.
FaceTime, right? Not like face to
Yeah.
face time. So when COVID happened, we opened up kind of our eyes to like, okay, we'll entertain, clients that are not here. And at the same time, we ended up picking up clients that were here that we never met in person. So it almost didn't even really matter anymore where they were located. And so many of the companies we work with have distributed teams now anyway.
Yeah. So how do y'all set boundaries for your customers? I mean, obviously, an emergency happens. I'm sure y'all call 24/7, like something really bad happened. But how do you set boundaries? Like obviously, you don't want Kevin's HR calling you at 2 in the morning on Saturday for some random detailed thing, right?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Um, fortunate, Fortunately, that doesn't happen very much for us. We have had clients where we have felt like maybe there was not an appreciation of boundaries or, this idea of, because you procrastinated, now it's our problem.
Yeah.
And so you're going to have that sometimes. And we just have to kind of we try as much as we can to proactively mitigate that because we want to have a productive relationship with the client. And in the one case of the one client that we really had a heart, they'd be like texting us at 9:30 to do something that night, repeatedly. Once in a while, we understand that's going to happen, but it was such a repetitive thing, and it was like it was something that they would have known about, a few days ahead of time, but we didn't find, they didn't let us know till it needed to be done at that hour. We ultimately ended the engagement with that client.
Okay.
That's not to say, like I said, we'll have opportunities where we're working through the weekend because something really exciting is coming up on Monday and we're jazzed about it. We're happy to do it. So I think we're fortunate it doesn't happen very often. But we also are really intentional about clear communication, asking the questions so that we can get as much eyesight on what's coming up, 3, 6, 9, 12 months down the road so that hopefully there aren't going to be as many of those surprises.
So how do you deal with this? And this is probably a bad example, so pick a better one if you can. Like suppose you're a founder and they're about to close, we'll say a $3 million round, right? Everyone's hired them, their momentum, and you get a call. This founder got a DUI and severely injures some people, right? Like I said, it's probably a bad example, but how do you deal with those kind of situations, right?
So I think what you're probably talking to is like, how do we approach crisis
Yeah, yeah.
communications or reputation management? So I think, one is authenticity is important. I think that we always, never lie. And then, we hope that we have the relationship with the client that if something bad was to happen like that, or if they anticipated, they find out they're going to get sued or that they would call us first. Right. And, we definitely coach them to not respond to questions, to not, post on social media, until we've had a chance to have a conversation. I think, it's in any situation we want to kind of see like what is kind of who have you hurt or who's affected by this and what's going to be important for them to hear. Um, Less is way more in most of those situations. Depending on what it is, in many cases it truly really isn't anybody else's business, but people are going to find out. And so we just want to make sure that we work with them to basically come up with a way that they being the client feels, okay, I know what I'm supposed to do, or I'm not going to say anything, or I'm going to release, we'll write a statement and that becomes the only statement that gets used. But we really just coach them to make sure we're coming up with something that's transparent, feels real, but that less is more.
So what I have a client have to do that was so bad for y'all to say, hey, we can't deal with you no more. For example, like that guy, Sam Bakefield from FTX,
Oh yeah.
like what would have to happen was, you know what? I know we're supposed to do PR, but this is out of control right here. Like this is like theft, stealing. Like we can't deal with you no more. We'll give you a refund of your money.
Oh gosh, yeah. So is the question, what's the threshold?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, we've stopped working with founders just because they were not nice to us, or they weren't nice to each other, or so I think for us, like as the first kind of most important thing, we have a no asshole policy. We're not going to work with people that aren't respectful. We want to have respectful relationships. So if we are not being respected, then we will exit the engagement. And we'll do it in a very respectful way. We'll make sure that they feel whole on whatever they've spent and make sure that, we finish out, finish out kind of whatever the commitment is in a way that feels mutually beneficial and that they leave feeling like they're walking away with something of value to them. Um, we have fortunately have never had to deal with a client that is getting into like criminal behavior
So
or
no
things
Sam,
like that.
no Sam
No,
Bankman,
not yet.
no Elizabeth Holmes, no Theranos, nothing like
No,
that.
no, God, no, no. But I will tell you, after the whole Elizabeth thing, Holmes thing happened, so it really did change. Again, going back to like being authentic and clear, it really did. It rattled a lot of the founders we work with because they were like, I think they just became afraid. Like, wait, are we saying anything? Like, are we making any claims that we are like not 100% positive we can back up?
Yeah.
You know, and the way that, you think about all those investors who got so burned and so many of them were high profile that, investors became a lot more,
Mhm.
skeptical as they should be after that happened.
Do you think that was because she's like a pretty blonde female? That stuff was going on, and to me, the red flag. This to me, this what the red flag was. Besides all the scientific stuff going on, like you're like a bioscience startup. Why in the world do you have like four-star journals on your board?
Yeah.
Like that's one thing I couldn't figure out. Like, and that wasn't like they're like army generals or doctor like army doctors like they're like combat veteran like and they were high profile generals too, right?
Yeah. But you're like,
Y-
what are you doing in biotech?
Yeah,
Right. Or yeah.
to me that was a red flag right there.
Well, and I think there was, I think that, that story rattled everybody in so many ways. I think because they're like the question is like, how could that happen? And I don't think there's one answer. I think and I don't know if you've watched any of the movies, but I think there's multiple places where somebody should have said,
Yeah, well, I think part of what's it called, bandwagon effect.
yes,
One big profile investor jumps on board, everybody
yes,
jumps on board. Well,
100%.
they must have vetted him,
Yeah.
but they
And
did.
they're all pointing back to the last guy, right?
Yeah.
They're like, well, how did you know it was a good, well, because he did.
Mhm.
Well, how did you? Because they did, and it kind of just goes back like that. So, yeah, that was,
It's like the perfect storm almost, right?
yeah, yeah. It's mind blowing. And to think that they had, contracts with like, I think Walgreens and some of these huge companies to bring this technology in, and they didn't have
Wasn't they just like sent it to the Philippines or something, and like it was just
it. It
insane.
just, yeah, it's wild. Yeah.
And of course, the bad part is like now you probably have investors out there like hesitant to invest in female founders because of this, right?
I don't know. I haven't seen that it has directly necessarily affected female founders versus just
Founders in general.
founders in
Okay,
general,
all right.
especially founders that are working in like diagnostics
Mhm.
and, because obviously what she was doing was in the diagnostic space. I think,
Yeah, you better have some
um,
hellified proof
yeah,
now.
yeah,
The
yes,
character was bad before.
yes, 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 yes.
So, next question. Besides doing what the CEO does not want to do, what does a chief operating officer do?
Well, and it's going to be different depending on the size of your company, right? So our team we have 4 people, and then we have a bunch of partners we work with. I think it's a combination of coaching the team. So I do a lot of, making sure that that the team feels supported, that they feel resourced, making sure that we are all working in our best, most efficient way, and making sure that we feel like we're using our resources most effectively. We have very open communication with our team. So we talk, all the time just about like, are there processes that are working really well? Are there things that we should do differently? And we definitely don't have sort of a hierarchical approach. It's very much about everybody in the team has a lot to contribute. And so I focus very much on just making sure that everybody is supported in a way that makes them, most effective and feel most engaged and supported.
So you talk about the sum already, but about your customer. Well, who is your customer, right? It's like based on a certain amount of money raised, like
Mhm.
life tech, like we go in detail about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So we work sort of across the ecosystem. So most of our clients tend to be startups. We do have clients that are like VC funds or angel funds that we've worked with to help them increase deal flow and things like that. And then we also have had clients that are we call them like the conveners. So you think about like the um the incubators or the accelerators, or we've done some work with OBI, which is the Oregon Bioscience Incubator down in Portland. So we kind of run kind of across the ecosystem. In terms of the kind of our primary customer client, it's the startups. Or we work with some small businesses as well. But I essentially seed S2S stands for seed to series or series A to series B, which essentially means we mostly work with venture backed startups or companies that are going to at some point seek venture funding. Yeah.
So if someone's raising a Series A, I mean D or C, or someone's like already like a multi-million dollar company that's too big for you.
Yeah. It's interesting. I would have said yes at one point, but we have, we have a company now that is probably going to close a Series C in, relatively near future. We've worked with, companies that have closed, upwards of 75 to $100 million before. But then we also work with companies that have only closed, a million, so I think and in terms of how we structure our work, we understand the sort of the financial situation of a startup, and there's like runway is always a consideration. So we don't do long-term contracts. So we try to make sure that we can either, offer hourly or project-based work if you just need help like with your website, or like, I don't know where to start with social. Maybe the scope is just helping you, develop a social strategy, all the way to clients that, we are on retainer and we do everything from social to finding events for them to speak at, to their press releases, to their website, to awards and kind of the whole bucket.
So on your website, you have a lot of great testimonials. The question is, does that really help? Or do most people like look at testimonials? Like, okay, obviously they pay for these testimonials, right?
Oh yeah. So what I would say is, one, we don't pay for our testimonials. I think it depends on the industry that you're in, how important testimonials are. I think that, most of our business is referral based. So I think for us, the website is not really a sales tool. I think the website is a validator. So, if I have a conversation and you're thinking like, well, I'm interested in hiring S2s, you might go to the website and just kind of see how we show up there, but it's probably not going to make or break it. But I think testimonials are still powerful. Yeah.
Is there some kind of, big, like lack of a better term, PR industry god in the sky, like controls PR, like, gives like PR certifications, or like gives like a monthly PR newsletter or the upcoming stuff in PR?
Yeah, there's a lot of organizations that provide those kinds of tools. I don't find them for the work that we do. I think what we do is so specific to kind of this tech startup landscape that we haven't found it to be as helpful. But like PRSA, which is uh, Public Relations Society of America, maybe PRSA is one. PR Week puts out, newsletters and things like that. And I definitely like read all those. I think the challenge, going back to what we talked about earlier, is that you cannot take a one size fits all approach with PR. So even though there's a lot of those resources out there, sometimes when you're speaking to too large of an audience, you're not really connecting in a relevant way with kind of some of the niche audiences that really need help.
So what's y'all's take on social media? 'Cause I know some founders like, I don't have time to be on social media. I got to build a product, and some founders like are posted like, not minute by minute, but almost minute by minute on
Yeah,
every single platform, right?
yeah. Um, I think our position is that every founder should be on LinkedIn. And I think that LinkedIn is a primary source of professional news for most professional people. So it's important, I think, to kind of get a gauge of kind of what's the conversation happening in your industry. Even if you're not posting all the time, I think it's important for you to see what are other people in your industry posting about, kind of what are the trends that people are talking about. And then for you to find opportunities to plug into those conversations as much as you can and to provide some sense of thought leadership. It builds credibility. It's very important from like a partnership development. And if you're in a B2B industry, which obviously I know you are, for you to be able to, going back to the idea of generosity, what can you share? How can you help educate people to be more successful without making them pay you? I think LinkedIn is a great tool for that. And then it is a validator, and it builds credibility. As you get ready to go out and raise money, your investors are going to look at how you show up online. And I think LinkedIn is a really important place to show up. So that's the first part. Was there another part of the question?
I think that was it.
Okay.
So next follow-up question, like, so obviously I think this depends like if you're B2B or consumer tech, whatever, right? But suppose someone came to you and they're like on all the platforms, right? Snapchat, Instagram,
Yeah.
Threads, on and on, right? Which one do you say, okay, you need to get rid of this one because it's not doing any value? Like no one is even
Yeah.
going to go to this one right now.
That's a good question. And it's gonna be a different answer, if you are, we're talking to some folks now that we're helping out that they're really trying to reach like college age students. They absolutely should be on TikTok.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, most of the other people we work with probably do not need to be on Facebook and Instagram.
Yeah.
So, most of the technology startups we work with are looking to sell either into like academic institutions or, get grants or, have, get partnerships with healthcare institutions or things like that. And they're just probably not going to see as much value necessarily. Now, if you're trying to sell to maybe, local community doctors or healthcare clinics, they're more likely to be on Facebook.
Yeah.
So there might be a little bit of a place there. But again, we LinkedIn is like always first, we say, not just for the brand, but for the person as well. And you and I have talked about
Yeah.
that. Like it's really important for you as Jason to show up and kind of show your leadership. And then we actually still, and this is a controversial one, we still say that you should be on Twitter or X. And the reason is that even in 2024, journalists use Twitter, X, as a way to find stories. So interacting with the journalists that are covering your industry, liking their content, responding to it, sharing it, putting content out there that is relevant to kind of the work you're doing is really important for not only creating media opportunities for you, but also if you were to pitch a journalist about some new product that you came out with, they're going to go look on Twitter and see how Cavness HR shows up on
Yeah.
Twitter. So it is an important kind of, again, validation.
I know people probably know this, but for some reason, Twitter is a social media choice for HR professionals, right? There's like so many HR people on there. And then,
Interesting.
yeah. And then also, I have like a Twitter list of potential investors I follow, right? Who
Yeah.
want to invest in me. So I go there maybe once a week, go on the Twitter list of fun potential
Yep.
investors, make comments, do that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
I think Twitter lists are a really big thing, at least for me it
Yes.
is.
Yes. We always recommend we build Twitter lists for all of our clients. And then if we don't manage social for them and they say, we don't even know how, like, this is a black hole. Where do we start? We say, just build a list.
Yeah.
It makes it really easy. Just, once a day, just open the list, see
Scroll
what
down.
everybody's talking about. If you see an article that you're excited about, or you think, they're missing this one key element, then you post that and you just comment on it.
Yeah.
And it's not as hard as I think. People get intimidated.
Yeah, definitely. So one social media I actually really love was Snapchat. I used to be a big Snapchat person, but then three or 4 years ago, I think they either changed the algorithm or made it more like AR, VR. Like I used to be on Snapchat all the time. I used to I see what's it called, Snapchat filters,
Oh
all
yeah.
kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then it's like changed, like haven't been there so long. I was just a big fan of them. To me, my theory is TikTok became what Snapchat should have been.
That's right. I think that's true.
Yeah.
I think that's true. And I don't even like, we look at a lot of kind of like the top trending platforms used by professionals and by brands. And Snapchat used to be a lot higher in the list than
Oh
it
yeah.
is now. Yeah. TikTok definitely has moved up more. And YouTube continues to be strong.
Yeah. I don't know. Like with YouTube and Instagram, it just seems like, unless you're like, Kanye West, Kardashian, some
Yeah.
big person, or some Instagram influencer, like you get no. Because I used to post a lot of times. And one day, because one thing I don't like about Facebook, I don't think you can see like who looks at it really, unless they comment, right? So one time I did a post, I think on LinkedIn, I got maybe a couple thousand like likes, whatever. I did the same on Facebook. I just said, hey, if you see this, like say something, like crickets, right?
Yeah.
So that one, Instagram, I might get like. Actually, I'm gonna stop post. I stopped posting stuff on Facebook for my business podcast. I'm probably doing Instagram too. Instagram, I'm lucky if I get 20 views on Instagram, right?
Yeah.
Where TikTok, I can get, one time I got 25,000 views on TikTok a couple of times. Same thing to YouTube and LinkedIn. But I think unless you're like some big company on Facebook and Instagram, it's like a waste of time almost.
I almost wonder though, for you, because you're always producing these short video clips that you put on your channels, is Instagram, the like stories and reels on Facebook and Instagram.
Yeah.
We are seeing more brands that are just doing that
Yeah.
and just putting those little clips out with, some
That's true.
hashtags.
I need to
So
do that.
if
Yeah.
you're already producing the content,
Yeah.
just kind of repurposing it, can't hurt maybe to try it.
Yeah. Maybe I'd do that. Maybe just do the stories.
Yeah.
That's a good
and just
idea.
see. Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any like new social media platforms out there? I think there's something called Blue Skies out
Yeah.
there.
Yeah,
Or-
there's a few. So Blue Sky is, I think, gaining interest among more of like the research community and
Well, that's
scientists
the one
use
by
it.
Jack Dorsey, right?
Yeah. Well, Jack Dorsey's Twitter.
I thought he started Blue Sky
Did he
too.
might have, I don't know.
Okay.
But so Blue Sky just recently though went from being closed access to open access just within the last couple months. So
Okay.
before that you had to get on the invite list and then you'd get the, the code and then you could download it and kind of check it out. And they recently opened it up and within the first day they got like several 100,000 users. I think time will tell. I mean, I think remember all the hype when Threads came out? It was
Yeah.
like, "Woo,"
And then
so, I think I think, we have some clients who are really, science, very, very much like science first people that they feel like Blue Sky is a nice community for like scientists to connect with each other. So maybe that will end up kind of being what it becomes. Then there's, Mastodon. Everybody was kind of excited about Mastodon.
yeah, I've
I
heard that
don't
a couple of times. I have no idea what it is. It's like a Twitter too, or what is that?
like it looks a lot
Okay.
like Twitter. Yeah, but
Do
it's
you
more
think
decentralized.
do you think people start these networks just because they're anti Elon Musk, or because
I don't know if it's, I mean, so
or he's not as liberal as they are?
yeah, I mean, I think that there are some people that maybe use that as kind of some of what their value prop is like, if you don't want to, be doing what, Elon Musk is doing, or you don't like where Twitter's going, then, come over here and check out what I'm doing. But I think at the end of the day, they're still just opportunists, right? They're like,
Yeah,
if you can grow a social network of, tens of millions of people, that's cool.
yeah. So
But
what's your
it's
take
tricky to
on
do.
what's your take on this? So Clubhouse started out so strong, and it's like overnight they failed, right? What do you think they did wrong?
You know what? I don't know. So, I mean, I can only speak that I was one of those people who loved Clubhouse until I didn't.
Yeah, you're
And
right.
I don't, and I think it's just like
It's
it's
not like
hard to ride the hype cycle.
it's
Like
not like it happened overnight, right? It was on, and then like Monday it was on it. Tuesday, like
I just stopped listening.
yeah,
And I don't I think um it's really hard to change habit.
mhm,
It's really hard to change habit. And I think you think about the social platform like scrolling Facebook or, is it's like an addiction for people,
uh-huh,
And so I think it's it's really hard to endure past the hype cycle with technology
yeah.
with platforms like that. So it has to be like so incredibly sticky and like something that people are like, I can't not have this in my life.
I think one thing started turning me off on Clubhouse first was good. Then you started going like different groups, and like one or two people dominate conversation. No one
Yeah.
like there's a moderator, but they lost control. Or like okay,
Yeah.
what's going on here, right?
Yeah. It
But
kind of devolved. Yeah, for sure. And the quality, I think, became probably an issue.
are they
Yeah.
still around or
I think so.
okay?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't even, I mean, that's how long it's been since I've looked.
Yeah, because I think I read somewhere like MySpace still has like maybe 12 million users or something, right?
MySpace is
Yeah,
still alive?
MySpace is still around. Yeah, they still like 12, 50 million users. Yeah,
Like, if they're all like our age or,
probably so.
of like, because I mean, I don't even think like my kids have ever heard of
Yeah,
MySpace.
yeah.
Interesting.
So how do y'all help founders raise capital, or do y'all help them raise
How do
capital?
we help them?
Yeah.
The first thing we do is make sure that their stories is tight, right? That their story is tight, that it hits on all the things that we know are important for investors to see. We make sure that their website is, really clean and doesn't have to be elaborate, but making sure that they have, at least a nice, even if it's just a simple page. We do a lot of things to try to increase their thought leadership ahead of time. So we talked about making sure that they're on LinkedIn. So we make sure we've got a really compelling LinkedIn strategy that they're posting at least once a week. We can help them write the content. We make sure we look for opportunities to get them in the media as well. So see if we can get them some interviews on podcasts. Figure out what is, if we can get some, third party validation through media coverage, that really helps de-risk them as well. So we look at kind of looking ahead over the next maybe, 3 to 6 months ahead of a fundraise. Is there any announcements that we can help make, about kind of new hires or, new milestones with their technology, things like that. So we just try to make them look as good as possible before they go out to raise money.
Is everything PR worthy?
Oh God. Oh
Okay.
no. And I think like I have this like
horrible, like, example of a story of like what not to do. And it was a large wearable device company last year put out a press release announcing, like, it's been 1 year since we closed our, like, we're celebrating the 1 year anniversary of closing our fund or
Not
closing our round.
not they started a new fund or not like
Not that they, no, it was like,
no new product development. Just like
it's like it's been a year. So we're celebrating the 1 year, and there was a little bit of like, we're celebrating our achievements during that time. And so there was like a couple things listed in there of like, we made some progress on this and we made some progress on, but there was nothing
but
newsworthy about it.
nothing like we took this money and we did like
And even that isn't necessarily newsworthy. What that would be is that's a great newsletter.
Mhm.
Like, literally, I read the press release. I thought, oh, this is a newsletter. Your stakeholders would be interested to know these things. They would like to know that since you closed your round last year, that you've added a few key hires, or you've made a little bit, but nothing in it was essentially newsworthy. And what ended up happening is the media destroyed them. And it ended up being like there were stories done on how bad it was that they did that.
oh my goodness.
And then what happened 2 weeks later? They laid off like 30% of their staff. And so it became very, very, I mean, the way it looked from the outside is you're trying to get some nice media coverage to hide the fact that you're about to have to lay off all these people. And the opposite happened. They laid off all these people, and then people, like, the media is like, on the heels of this bizarre announcement where they didn't really announce anything, they laid off all these people. So it ended up, so I think that the cautionary tale there is, you might think it's news, but you need to figure out who else is going to think it's news and who else is really going to care, right? And then make sure that you have a story that a journalist is going to care about, because it relates to something that's important to them. Otherwise, you're going to waste their time and you could embarrass yourself.
Why do you think so many people are bad at reading the room, so to speak? For example, I think a couple of Super Bowls ago, Coinbase did a TV commercial, and like 2 months later, they laid off like 25% of the staff, right? Like, why do you think so many people mess that up?
Well, and maybe that was a last ditch effort, thinking like, well, maybe if we do this commercial, somehow
do
it's
this
going
home
to turn
run.
us around. Yeah.
Let's bet it all on black.
Yeah. And then maybe it's gonna turn us around. I think that is a strategy, right? Is to like, okay, we got one more shot. What's our last shot? And if this doesn't work, then we're gonna have to,
Mhm.
either shut down or consolidate the team.
That's such a bad look for them, though.
Oh,
Yeah, that's bad.
yeah. When it doesn't work, which a lot of times it doesn't, it does look really bad. I think going back to what I said earlier, we talked about that idea of ego. And I think we work with founders a lot of times who think that they have something that is newsworthy, and we try to work with them to make it into something that's newsworthy. And sometimes we get there. We'll say, okay, so it's got a couple of the components, but we really need like a customer who's willing to talk about how this affected them, or we'd really need like a new partner that has signed a contract with you and can talk about how they're excited to be bringing this new technology into their clinic, or things like that. There's a lot of really creative ways to make news. So I think a lot of times we can get there, but you have to, again, you can't follow a template, and you have to be really thoughtful and kind of like, and how do we tell the story? It's not everything is a press release, and it might even just be like, this is a great story that maybe, you should tell on a podcast, or maybe we're going to write an article that's going to be written by you, Jason, and then we're going to go to HR magazines and pitch this piece to them and get them to publish it. So, there's a lot of different creative ways to tell a story. It doesn't always and oftentimes it's not a news release.
So that's a good point. How do you decide where to go to? Like obviously everything's not going to be ABC News or Washington Post.
Right.
Some's like more like, I don't know, like Puget Sound Business Journal or
Yeah.
HR magazine. Like how do you like, and I'm guessing if someone wants to go to, Washington Post, there's a whole lot more money versus going like, HR magazine, right? So how do y'all decide and recommend that kind of stuff?
That's a good question. So there's a couple things we start with, which is like, what is, if you're the client, what would success look like? Okay, you've got your story out. What do you want to have happen? Do you want this to increase deal flow? Are you hoping this means that you're going to get, more people signing up to try out your product? Are you hoping to raise money or hoping to recruit? And then who is the audiences that you need to reach in order for those things to happen? And, we do a lot of times we have clients who say, well, we really want to get in the New York Times or the Washington Post. And those are great, but a lot of times when it comes down to it, if it's like, well, what we really need is like a couple of, new academic research partners, or, we've got this new product that we're trying to sell into, let's just say, to dentists or something like that. Is being in the New York Times going to be better for you bringing your technology to dentists, or is getting exclusives in publications that reach all the dentists in America going to be more effective? And oftentimes it's the latter, right? So I think we just work with them on like, what does success look like truly? Like, again, going back to ego, it feels good to end up in the New York Times. There's also a lot more risk of being in the New York Times because at a publication of that size, they're going to look for tension. So they're not going to just write this glowing story all about, Cavness HR and say everything that they're doing is perfect. They're going to poke holes in it, and they're going to try to find flaws in what you're doing. And they're going to go find people who have a counterpoint to your point. So there's all these things that I don't know if people always consider, that the New York Times is not there to market your product.
Yeah.
Whereas you get some of these more like industry focused publications, they're much more likely to want to showcase new innovation that's moving their industry forward. So you're more likely to have a positive story, and you're also more likely to get directly in front of the people who are making decisions and are more likely to purchase your product. So that's how we kind of think that through.
So what's been the most outlandish request? Like, has anyone ever come to you? I suppose they had the money, right? They come to you, hey, I want to do a Super Bowl commercial, or I want to be on the Times Square during New Year's Eve. Anything like crazy like that?
No.
Okay.
But I mean, we definitely have had founders who, would like to be in the New York Times, but don't have a product yet, right? They have an idea. So I think there's a level on our side of education and expectation management of, it's not, no, you're not going to be in the New York Times, but it typically takes, we've had clients we've worked with where it's taken over a year to get them into the New York Times, or, and by over a year, I mean over a year of specifically working on that exact tack, like getting them in the New York Times. So we might have worked with them for 5 years, and then we get to the point we say, okay, now we think it's time to start courting this opportunity. And then we really have to think about who are the right reporters, what are the angles that we might, and it's you have to build a relationship with the reporter. And then and that can often take several months. So so when we have founders that come to us and they don't have a product yet, and maybe they have, a little bit of published research, but that's it. We'll say, okay, well, let's make that as a goal, but let's talk about what it's going to take to get there. Where else, like, if you can show up in some publications that are maybe a little bit smaller, more like niche focused on your industry, journalists look at that. And that becomes like, for a journalist at the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal, they'll look and see, oh, okay, Cavness HR has been covered by these other industry publications. It's just a little bit of like a sense of, creates a little bit more credibility. And it's like, okay, well, they've already vetted Cavness. So now I'm a little bit more likely to think about it. So you kind of have to think about it as like kind of stepping stones to get to where you want to go.
So you talk about founders building relationships with like different news people. How do y'all as a PR firm build relationships with different people, like at the news agencies and stuff?
Yeah. Well, it's really important, one, to be very like empathetic to what it's like to be a journalist. And it helps that both Eric and I are former journalists. Because, a journalist gets averages 50 pitches a day before noon. So I think being mindful of the fact that, and as we talked about, newsrooms are shrinking dramatically. So I think you have to take the approach of empathy, of making sure that you're not wasting their time. So don't pitch them something if, we won't pitch something if we don't truly believe that this might be of interest to the journalist. So we make sure, we use databases, and, we have resources to help kind of see who are the journalists covering, using HR as an example, HR technology, right? So we might say, okay, these are the journalists that write about technology for HR. And then we go back and we look and see, okay, what have they been writing about more recently? And then we might say, okay, this journalist, does HR, but it's really more about, let's just say payroll, or it's really more about, whatever it might be. And then we might just say, okay, so this is not the right journalist for this opportunity. And so we might only pitch 10 to 15 journalists, which is something sometimes clients will say, well, why don't you, pitch 500? Because then no one's going to read it, right? You can't take that shotgun approach. You really have to be focused. So that's the approach we take is, one, we don't waste their time. We try to help them do their jobs. So we offer them resources. We say, okay, you're writing, we can tell you're writing a series on this topic. Here is a person, if you're interested, who could speak on X, Y, and Z. And we'll give 3 talking points. And those will be things that we know will add to the story that journalist is working on. So we just try to make sure that, our pitches are very short, very targeted. We'll reference articles that they already wrote and say, hey, we read your article on this. Here, we've got a founder who's working in the space that we think might help you advance your story. If you're interested, this is the founder. This is, kind of 3 key points that this person could talk about. If you're interested, we'd be happy to make an introduction. And a lot of times those intros are just background calls and there's no expectation of a story.
Should journalists like either yourself or other people like great journalists, like maybe, journalist A is like, he's fair. He might write what you want to, he's fair. Or
Yeah,
this journalist, like, don't go to him. He'll just do a hit piece on you or that kind of stuff.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And sometimes it's the journalist themselves. Sometimes it's the publication. There are some publications that it's a little bit more part of their brand to do, they're a little bit more investigative, or they kind of try to uncover another side of the story or things like that. And sometimes that makes, that creates a little bit more risk or vulnerability for our client. And we're just honest about that with the client. We say, I know you'd love to be in this publication. Obviously, it's one of the biggest in your industry. Just so you know, this is how they approach their journalism. And we just want to make sure that you're comfortable with it before we go to them with the story.
So how do you protect your clients from this? Or how do you like, I don't know, do this? Like suppose you get a client and they sit down with someone for a 30-minute interview, but they only like maybe use 2 minutes of it. It's something taken totally out of context, like how do you protect that? Or is that a risk you have to take?
There's always a risk, but there are things you can do to mitigate. So we always do, prep for our clients ahead of time. So we'll give them, we'll meet with them ahead of time. We put together a document, say, this is the reporter. This is kind of what they typically write about. Here's a link to some of their recent articles. So we encourage the client to make sure to read some of the other stuff this person's written about. Any other kind of nuances to how this journalist approaches their work will include. And then we'll put together a list of talking points and say, these are the things that we think are most important to include to really tell the story in a way that is what you want. And then we'll talk to them about like, don't mention this project that you're starting because it's not ready for, because we don't have any validation yet. Or, here's a potential area that would be better to stay away from. And if they ask you, here's how to answer. So we just kind of help coach them on how to have those conversations.
So what if like they're talking to the reporter, let's say they say 2 sentences, like very positive, very whatever. And the reporter takes the first middle 6 words. It sounds really bad, right? And they put up a set. Y'all go back and say, hey, this is what he said, or like you have what, I can't think of what, like another article comes out. Like I know what the reporter said is taken out of context. This is the whole story.
Yeah. So so I would say that is something that you do see sometimes, especially I think in shorter form journalism. I think in like TV and radio, you kind of see that more often because their reporters are having to take this like really complex story and whittle it down to like a 30-second story. And a lot of times you lose some of the context. What we run into, I think even more than that, is because we are working with like really complex technologies, is that perhaps the reporter, not intentionally, but just didn't fully capture accurately the technology or the way the technology works. So they might say something that even though it sounds very similar, like they might paraphrase, and you got to be careful when you're talking about scientific or technology that you got to be careful when you paraphrase. And our experience has been that in almost all instances, when we go back to the journalist and request a correction, that they make them. The only time that they wouldn't would be if it was truly what we said and they captured exactly what we said, and we just wish that we had said it.
Okay.
And that does happen sometimes, that we just have to deal with it.
So I'm guessing y'all get to see a lot of exciting tech science stuff coming up. Is there anything coming up in science or tech that you've seen that they really excites you?
Yeah, everything we do excites us. which makes what we do really fun. We don't always understand it because it's like oftentimes like really complicated. We can't talk about all of it, but I mean, I can tell you about some of the stuff that I'm excited about that we don't have clients in the space right now, but is an area that's really exciting to us. And that's what's happening with like the space economy and thinking about, I don't know if you know Rob Meyerson, but he was the former president of Blue Origin. And he's spectacular and I have tremendous respect and appreciation for him. He's a Tacoma guy. But he just started a new company and they announced it, I think a couple of weeks ago. It came out of stealth and it's called Interloon. And they're going to be a natural resources mining company in space. And so they're going to be mining the moon for helium-3, which is a scarce resource here on Earth, but could really be, really amazing for addressing some of the issues we have as it relates to like the strained power grids, things like that. And there's a lot of really interesting applications, but that's an example of like kind of what's happening with space between not only like obviously like sending tourists to space is interesting and people are paying attention, but all the other kind of potential applications of technology for basically pulling resources from space to make life on Earth better, I think is also extremely fascinating.
Yeah, that's what I think too. I think a lot of people like they criticize the Musk and the Bezos for like spending billions in space. Like my thing is like have no proof, of course, but like they're not going to space for ego. They're going to space like mine minerals off asteroids and like space tourism. Like they have a plan. I'm sure like recoup the money.
There's a lot more to the space story than just sending tourists to space.
Yeah,
and I think that's really interesting.
Like me, I have a theory. And I think when my kids are in their 20s, and I think by the time my grandkids are old, before that, I think we have space hotels in space.
I think we will even sooner than that.
Yeah, I think we will go.
Yeah.
There'll be at least space hotels in space at a
Yeah.
minimum.
I think the speed of innovation around space is going to rapidly accelerate.
Yeah. I can't think what's called this thing where like tech advances every trauma, something like that. Like think about like with me, I went from playing Pong to AI, right?
Right.
And like it's probably like double, triple that within the next 10 years, right?
Even just think about from where we were with the first iPhone till now.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
It's mind blowing. So I think that what's happening in that space is incredibly interesting. And I also think that what's happening, what the potential for like truly like personalized healthcare and personalized medicine, I think is also extremely exciting in terms of like, I think that by the time, you and I are, in our later years, that will probably, the lifespan will probably be another 20 years plus.
Yeah, I agree.
So I right now, people are living into their, their average life expectancy might be like into the 80s. And I think by the time you and I are in our 70s, it's probably going to be more like 100.
Of course, that's another set of problems, right?
So, well, it brings up a whole, absolutely.
Like we don't have no Social Security to pay for people down to 75.
And that's a problem, right? People are talking about that now because it is a problem. And what does retirement age look like? And people retire when they're 60 thinking they've got 20 years left and now they're 90 40. And they're not, they still got time and they're out of money.
You have an increase of, old homeless people,
Yeah, and that's the thing though about science is that there's everything connects to everything else and everything has, for every action, there's a reaction. For everything that happens, you have to consider all those. And I think that's why going back again to why I was passionate at the Science Center about this idea of science and society is it's not only important to understand like the fundamentals of science, but it's important to be able to connect the dots between that to political considerations, ethical considerations, environmental, like if we do this, then what? And I know that that's the big question everybody's asking around AI right now. But it is really, really important that as we as a society accelerate innovation, that we understand or really do our best to understand what does that mean.
I remember before Nikki Haley dropped out of the presidential race, she said something to the effect, yeah, you're gonna have to work like you're 95, right? And of course, people are like, that shit crazy, right?
She's
not lying.
If you look it up, the science supports that our lifespans are going to increase in short order.
One thing too, I think I could be wrong with this. Like, of course, we're in Seattle, we're in this tech bubble. I just believe most average Americans have no idea about the current tech, the tech's coming. Like I went to a network thing yesterday with the pizza made with robots. I saw a video a couple of weeks ago, maybe a couple of days ago, where this AI robot made by OpenAI and BMW, like was like having a conversation, made dinner,
Mhm.
stuttered. Like it's like no one has any idea. Like
No.
I mean, I used to be against UBI, and I'm like, man, maybe we do need UBI now, right? Because no one's gonna have a job.
Well, and the thing is that, and again, me going back to being an optimist, I think that, um, like 2 points. One, I think we see things like robots and space travel, and we see the exciting, sexy part, which is like these robots that are doing like human, they seem like a human and they're making me my coffee. And, you know, and then you think about space and you think about Blue Origin and, X and, or, SpaceX and, sending William Shatner to space. And there's all these like sexy
Yeah,
headliney stories, but like robots are, performing open heart, performing surgery in remote parts of the world where you can't get a surgeon there to do that.
yeah,
That's pretty amazing, and I think, going back to like what Interloon is doing in space, that's not humans on the moon mining, that's
yeah,
robots. So I think that um, robots will enable us to do things that we as humans physically cannot do. And I think what if we can treat things, if we can treat innovation as opportunity builders versus like taking away opportunity from people, then I think we can get creative with then how do we then maybe upskill people who normally would have done skills that are being done
yeah.
by robots to give to, because I think there's a lot of work that, and I know this is, with your platform, even that there's work that you're moving off of an HR generalist's plate, which enables them to do work that is more valuable of their
Yeah, I
time.
mean, AI is definitely part of my product roadmap down
Yeah.
the road. I mean, it's no
Yeah.
doubt. I mean,
But you think about it's not like, oh, you don't necessarily need HR anymore. It's just you can allocate those resources towards something that's a better use of a human's time.
yeah.
And so,
So someone asked me like a couple days ago, "Are you gonna have a robot in your house, Jason?" I said I was joking around, yeah, but it has to be like a 5'2", 75-pound robot. Because when they turn on Skynet, I have a fighting chance.
yeah. Well, I have a robot that vacuums my floor every day, but yeah, that's funny. But there are things that people have now that are
Yeah,
robots and you just don't realize
you
that,
don't.
you know?
So I know y'all pretty involved in Seattle tech startup scene. Any other like Bay Area, Austin area startup scenes y'all pretty involved with also?
I mean, certainly not as much as here, just because we love it here and we're here. But we certainly have, we have clients and partners in the Bay Area, and have done quite a bit of work out in sort of like the Boston kind of like Triangle area. And so I think for us to be good at our jobs, we have to understand the landscape and understand kind of the climate of investing and sort of what the culture of investing on the West Coast looks very different than on the East Coast. And I think you think about the investors that are coming out of the Silicon Valley, and they're more likely to invest in founders. They've that's what they've kind of historically done. Where a lot of the founders on the East Coast might be more needing to see more product traction, for example. Or so I think, and that's just an example, but I think um, in terms of where we spend most of our time, it's here, but we do have clients and contacts and relationships in other markets because I think it's important to understand that it's a global economy. So we even have to kind of understand what's happening globally, and we do help companies that are successful in other countries that are looking to move into the US market. And so they'll call us and we'll help them figure out how to do that.
So what's your take on this? Let's see if we agree or disagree. Of course, like Bay Area is different from Seattle, right? And so I have a friend who's a VC in the Bay Area. I said, why is it so different? He said, like, so it's like this, Jason. Like in the Bay Area, all the VCs are former founders. All the investors are pretty much former founders. In Seattle, they're like pretty much like former Amazon, former Microsoft.
Hmm.
And he said in the Bay Area, like a founder makes it like suppose, Michael Jones sells a company for $100 million. He reinvested. He said, like, as far as I know, when a founder makes it in Seattle, they don't reinvest it, right? Do you think that's
Yeah.
true, untrue?
I don't have enough data to say it, but it makes sense to me. I mean, that sounds true based on kind of you think about the demographics of this region versus the long history of kind of VC activity in the Bay Area.
I know, and my thing too, I think Seattle spends too much time trying to be the Bay Area, right? That's never going to happen, right?
No.
How does Seattle, like, focus on being the best Seattle it can be versus trying to be something they'll never be?
And that's a good question. Um, I think it would love to see, continue to see more Seattle money stay in Seattle. I think that's hard. Um, I don't know. That's a tough question. I think we just have to continue to create a culture that supports innovation, and I think that's who we've been in many ways. But I think we can continue to be better about that. I think that Seattle has a strong sense of community, which I think is strong. Um, that's a good question. I don't know that I have a great answer.
Okay. And from your point of view, what are some pros and some cons about the Seattle tech startup scene, whether it be founders, innovation, investment, anything you want to cover?
Well, I mean, I think you kind of already touched on this. It's really hard to raise money here, and I think that continues to be a problem. I think people want to raise money here and then end up leaving. They having to go outside of Seattle to bring in money. I think that's hard. It's expensive to be here, but I think you look at a lot of the other places where tech is happening and it's expensive.
Yeah.
So that
It is not cheap.
no, it is not. It is not. It is not cheap. So I think that's a challenge anywhere. I think maybe there's one thing I would say is maybe it's difficult to compete for talent. I think you do have like the Microsofts and the
Yeah.
Amazons and
Hey, you work for free for 6 months, and I'm going to give you
yeah,
some equity in the future. Or
yeah, right.
crazy amounts of loot at Amazon.
Yes. So I would say that's probably one of the biggest challenges is just having access to talent. And I think in the last in the last year, we've seen these huge layoffs that has probably benefited the startup scene a little bit. I think you look at these just unbelievable salaries that we were seeing within the tech industry over kind of during the
Yeah.
whole COVID time, and how, I mean, that just made it like impossible, I think, for startups
Yeah.
to be able to compete.
I thought it was crazy. I know when I had all layoffs, people said, "Oh man, we get all this tech talent, right?" But people from Amazon, Microsoft were like going on startups. I got paid X amount of Amazon. I need that same amount. Like, what?
Yeah.
Are you insane? Like, this is a
No.
startup. Like,
Yeah.
no.
No. Yeah. And actually, I've worked before I worked where I work now. I worked at a startup that we attracted some talent out of Microsoft, and talk about a culture shift,
Mhm.
and it was like, you got to be here because you really believe,
Yeah, it's like
and you're
going,
taking a bet.
it's like going from the country club to, like, no, you got to work for real now.
Yeah. And you have to really buy into the vision.
Yeah.
You're not coming because of your paycheck, because we're not going to be able to cater lunch every day if you don't have 27 other perks. But we're building something, and if you believe in it and you can help us get there, the payday could be, pretty big at the
Yeah.
other end. So I think you have to get people who are willing to, I think, take risks too.
Yeah. I know this has always been one of my like pet peeves of investors here. Like all these investors here, they'll say, of course, they hear the criticism like this is not funding right. But they'll say, well, we always invest in companies that deserve to be funded. But I know so many startups, like you said, go to Austin, the Bay Area. Like I know one lady had like some kind of sales platform. She couldn't even get a meeting here, right? Moved to New York City for a job. 6 months later, she got a $500,000 C round. A year later, she got $10 million A round. And then of course, then all the Seattle people want to jump on the bandwagon, right?
Yeah.
It's like so many people go somewhere else, and then the people here jump on. Of course, they do invest in stuff here, but it's just like, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. No, I hear that. I hear that a lot. Yeah.
And to me, that's frustrating. Like, suppose you're a founder here, right? And you try to get investment, you don't get nothing, you give up without going to the Bay Area, not knowing you can go like different places, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I tell you, you want to invest, you gotta. I think like me, probably April, May, I was planning on going to the Bay Area for like 2 or 3 weeks, right?
Yep.
Maybe relative. Like, I think you have to do it, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think going back to your question about like I think the more we can help each other, and we meaning sort of the other people that are kind of in this space too, that are also in the startup space, help each other with what we know, and educate like based here, so that not everybody's going to know where to go.
Yeah.
Right. So I think the more we can help, just knowledge share, and I think
Yeah.
is a way for us to really help build a stronger community here, and I think that's really important. And like that event you put on, I think was a great example of that. It didn't cost any money, and it was
Yeah.
a great just a lot of resources,
Yeah.
and and a sense of like, you are not in this alone. And
Mhm.
being a founder can feel really lonely sometimes. It's scary. And I think it's important to continue to cultivate culture of community.
Well, this one time I've been learning recently. It's kind of frustrating, right? Because I'm doing a pre-seed raise right now. Obviously, I reached out to like, BDB, HR tech stuff, and they said pose one website said early stage, one said like B round. I went to early stage, but I learned a lot of investors are saying, "Oh, I mean post seed or A round, not early."
They're not even counting the seed as,
No,
yeah,
it's early stage. Yeah,
they're past that.
yeah. Well, why do you say early stage on your website for?
Yeah. Yeah. That's disheartening, right?
Yeah,
And then you feel discouraged.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we've been at several networking events together, like GeekWire, the one I did, some other ones. Do you have any like favorite networking events that you go to or can recommend?
Hmm. Um, that's a great question. We, I've gone to lots of founders lives. And I think when Seattle did the Seattle Startup Week, I had thought there were some great events. I'm glad they've got that back on track. Um, I go to women in bio events. So that's obviously very specific niche, but I think women in bio they put on great events. Life Science Washington puts on great events. So I really enjoy those events for just getting to know people. Trying to think if there's any other like obvious, well, in the GeekWire
Mhm.
events. So those are probably kind of the main events that we always go
Now,
to.
GeekWire, they're more for later stage startups, right? Because I can't remember if they were like great stories like early stage startups. It was always like something like they do a story like you know XYZ rocket ships raised $10 million or something like that.
Yeah. Well, so I would say, I mean, we've had clients on the stage at GeekWire Summit that were still like had raised less than $10 million. So um, I think that there's a place on the stage for earlier stage founders, but I also think they're just good events to go to just meet other people. Because I do think a lot of earlier stage founders still go. But it's also, I think, a great place to, meet potential mentors. I've met, people at those events that are investors that went on to be strong, connections of mine. So, yeah.
Okay. What's a future plan for y'all? Like, is it like to become the number one PR company in dealing with tech startups, or that's maybe rephrase that question. So right now, can you talk about how the company got started, what you
Mhm.
focus on now, and the future vision of the company?
Yeah, great question. So started out really focused on more of the biotech kind of life sciences scene. And then kind of opened up opportunities to take in other clients that maybe were, in other areas of technology, but that again, the kind of the base for us on filtering is it has to be something that we're passionate about. And now we've grown to, serving companies that are kind of like all over. Um, I think what one way that we have changed our business model in the last 6 months or so is um, we used to only be retainer based, and what we have found is that with the challenges in the market right now with VC funding and a lot of startups still need help, but maybe aren't in a position to commit to a full retainer. It doesn't make sense for them. So we've now offered, we offer our services hourly or kind of just depending on whatever you need. That has opened up a lot more opportunity for us and some interesting new engagements I think are coming in. We've also recently partnered with another agency that's focused on life sciences communications so that we're able to access each other's expertise. So they have a team of like 20 that work across all different areas of life sciences communication. So we can put together the right team for the client. And so we're trying to, I think, build a model that is more flexible and able to best serve the clients based on kind of what they need at like, where they're at. I don't see us ever being a company that has, 50 PR people. I think one thing that's important to us is that no matter what, you get the senior people on your team. We don't hand off work to, account coordinators and things like that. Like, we're all very engaged. We all have a lot of experience. Eric and I both have over 25 years, and we think that's part of what makes us different and how we can provide value. So I don't think we'll ever grow too fast or too big that we can't continue to provide that level of like very senior level. We kind of it's almost more of like a fractional CMO kind of agency type approach where, we have one client who we just adore who refers to us as her in-house marketing team. Well, of course we're not in-house, but she feels like we are. And that feels good to us. And we always want to be that kind of agency.
Is there any type of tech startup that you would not support?
Um, yeah. I think there are, I'm not going to say that there's like a particular industry that we would stay away from, because we've said that in the past, and then somebody's come to us with the technology that's from an industry that we thought we wouldn't take, and we're like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Maybe we'll give that a try. So I think we're open. I think it just has to be something that we like philosophically feel good about, and that we feel that is truly inherently like technology that will, hopefully make the world a better place. And if it's something that is going to make the world a worse place, we won't do it.
So you have a current role at S2S. You're a mother, a wife, daughter. You do nonprofit stuff. I'm assuming you have friends that you do social stuff
Yeah.
with, hang out stuff, different hobbies. Like, how do you balance all that?
Yeah. I I'm a big believer that if remote work works for you, that's good. I know it doesn't work for everybody. For me, it works really well. I live away. I live an hour and a half out of Seattle, so coming into the city every day would not only be like a huge waste of time, I feel like, but it also would just like destroy me as a person. I feel like to be in traffic all day every day. I did that for a long time. So to me, having the ability to be able to work from a home office is something that's really important to me. I do come in, once a week and for events and stuff like that. Um, I think that I I'm an extrovert. So for me, I fill up by spending time with other people. Um, but I think, I enjoy, my weekends a lot. I enjoy spending time with my friends. I enjoy, getting happy hours in the afternoon and things like that. Um, I really just enjoy travel with my family. I would say that's like the biggest thing is I've always got something planned. And even if it's just a small trip to, Eastern Washington or something like that, I need like something like that to unplug. But we have a really good work life culture at S2S. So there's no expectation that people are, burning the midnight oil all the time, unless it's like we're all hands on deck. We've got this project that needs to get done. But otherwise, we're very respectful of each other's space and make sure people get to live their whole lives, which is really important.
So any like upcoming travel trips?
I just got back from Budapest. So that was like a huge one. My son went to school for a semester there, and
Okay.
that was like a life changing. It was like amazing. So we went to Budapest and then Switzerland.
Okay.
So that's the big one for a while. We're going to do a road trip to Montana and Wyoming
Okay.
this summer, which is like we did that several during COVID.
Yeah.
And it was just like an old fashioned road trip,
Mhm.
and it was just so fun. And so we're going to go, horseback riding and things like that. So we'll do that in June. And that's kind of it for now.
What part of Switzerland did y'all go to?
We stayed right outside of Zurich,
Okay.
and we got the Swiss pass, or
Mhm.
that tourists can use,
Yeah.
and we went to Grindelwald and went up to Lucerne a few times, and we actually spent the least amount of time in Zurich. We
Yeah.
were there for maybe a half day, but we really wanted to explore the
Yeah.
countryside.
People have no clue how beautiful that place is. It's like,
Right?
yeah.
Yeah. So what's your favorite part of?
So I was in a military station in Vicenza, Italy. So I used to go
Okay. Oh yeah.
right above the northern border right there.
Yeah.
This town right there. I can't remember the name of it. Yeah, it's like the big ass lake right there. It's like
Okay.
it's so nice. Yeah.
Oh, it's so beautiful. And it's like the green of the countryside is like it almost looks painted.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah, it
like
does.
we were there in December, and there was snow on all the Alps, but like the valleys were all just green, and we just kept taking pictures. Like, can you believe how green it is?
I know.
Yeah.
Another good place, Salzburg, Austria, right?
Oh,
You can actually hear them singing Sound of Music.
I
Right?
know. I could see them doing the
Yeah.
dance, and we were
Yeah.
either gonna go to Austria or Switzerland, and those were our top two choices. But I would love to go to Austria.
Any what's an off the wall place you've been where people like you had a great time there? People like you had a great time there. There's nowhere I will go there.
Oh gosh, uh that's a fun question. Um, what am I gonna say? Um, I mean, it's not off the wall, but I like, we love going to LA.
Mhm.
Like, I think people think of like San Diego or Santa Barbara or, but we love going, our son goes to school there and
Okay.
we go down and we just hang out in the city. And I know it's kind of grimy in places, but like,
Just a little bit.
yeah, no, but there's also like a lot of really cool
Oh yeah,
spots.
yeah.
So, we've really enjoyed going to LA. I've for work, I've been to St. Louis a few times and I was kind of like surprised by kind of, we did the whole arch thing and which was super scary and I would never do that again. But they put you in this little pod and I mean, it doesn't seem like it should
Looks
be
kind of sketchy.
alive. You're like, yeah, it's crazy, but
Yeah, I have a cousin lives in Burbank, and
uh-huh.
every time I go there, we go to Santa Monica Pier. I'm a big fan of Santa Monica
Oh
Pier.
yeah,
I
we
love
do
that
too.
place.
We do too. We were in LA recently, a few weeks ago and went to Burbank. Because we did the whole like Warner Brothers
Yeah.
studio tour, but then we ended up like walking into Burbank and finding a little like brewery and they were having a bingo night. And I love stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like just I love kind of not doing what everybody else is doing and just kind of seeing where like, what does life look like for people who live here? I think it's kind of fun.
Yeah. So back networking, right? And I could be wrong, but it's like in Seattle, there's all this networking stuff going on. Like Founders Live, New Tech Northwest,
Yeah.
Geekfire, on, right? But it's like everything's solid, right? It's like no one communicates. There's like those cross references, like your Founders Live, only Founders Live, New Tech Northwest, only New Tech West, or
Yeah.
Commercial Lab, only Commercial Lab. Like there's no cross pollination, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll be honest with you. I know I said I'm an extrovert. Networking is not my favorite thing.
Mhm.
Like I feel like it's so awkward to go into those places and like how do you even start it's just like you walk up to somebody and you think they're about ready to talk to you, but then they're also talking to somebody else and it's all awkward. But it is like you do see there's like kind of like a certain batch of familiar faces that you see at all the events.
But is that really networking or just hanging out with friends, right?
It's like you run into the same people and so you feel comfortable talking to
Yeah.
them and then you don't talk to the other 90% of
Yeah.
the people who you don't know. It's networking is hard.
Mhm.
And I think it's also like, there's this like sense of this culture around here that people are kind of standoffish
Yeah.
too. So it's tough.
I know, like me, I love putting on events. I like being in charge of events. I do a podcast, but in my mind, I second networking, right? Like to me,
Yeah.
like close as 4 people talking. To me, I think it's really good than just talking, right?
Right.
But because I know I'll be in a group of like 3 people, someone come start talking, like, dude, I'm talking right now, right? Like,
Right.
what the fuck are you doing, right?
Well, and then there's this expectation that they have to stop what they're doing to like acknowledge you and ask you who you are.
Yeah,
When really you're like, I'm okay with just coming to listen.
yeah.
Like you guys can continue.
Yeah.
You don't have to acknowledge that, but there's this, yeah, I agree. It's tough.
So I went to this event yesterday, put on by John Steinberg's kind of funnels dinner. And I got there like maybe starts at 6 o'clock. I got there at 6:15. Like 30 people were there already doing little groups and stuff. You're like,
Yeah.
instead of John, now I'm like to them like,
Now what?
like yeah.
Yeah.
Then like you said, someone who came in and started talking to him. Someone else came in and started talking
Yeah.
to him. But yeah, it's so fucking awkward.
It is.
So awkward.
And I don't know that there's any, I don't know that it ever won't be. Like, it's just really, I don't know that that's where I've met the most people either.
Yeah, like I can't say I ever. I know I'm wrong, but I can't really say I got any. I swear I got value from going to networking events because you meet people and all, but it's like not like like they say, right? Go network, may actually get $1 million or you may actually get 10 customers, right? It's like, of course you meet people and connect dots and stuff like that, but like, yeah, but you have to do it though. I
You
think.
have to do it. And what I have, and this didn't come from me, but it was some advice I read years ago. And I just try to take it with me when I go to those events is just go curious.
Yeah.
Like, don't go to talk about yourself. Just go to learn about other people.
Yeah.
Because people like to talk about themselves and they like to feel heard and it makes them feel good. And then you might meet some interesting people that way. And I usually kind of try to avoid even kind of talking about what I do unless they ask.
I try to do the same thing.
Yeah. So more just kind of like what brings you out that's really interesting and just, try to focus as much as I can on them and as little as I can on me. And then, every now and then somebody's like, oh, I actually know somebody who I'd love to introduce you to. And then that's always great. But
And that's why I like doing events because I can do the event, go to the email list, follow up later on,
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I actually, during COVID, it was funny. They'd moved, Founders Live had moved to just doing online for a while. And I remember watching a Founders Live live online. And I, I went to the Twitter, like he was like, here's the Twitter, hashtag for the event. And I went to the hashtag and saw a couple of people that were commenting on the person who was speaking. And I like responded, and that ended up being one of the best connections I ever made, because I met this guy who lives down in Tacoma who's very well connected. But I would have probably never walked up to him at the event.
Yeah.
But because we had this like online social
Mm-hmm.
interaction, now we like get together and have coffee.
Yeah.
That was actually felt more natural and less uncomfortable to me than doing it in person.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of Founders Live, but Founders Live, like you said, Founders Live, other events can be kind of clicky sometimes,
They all are.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just
Like going back
human
to high
nature.
school.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah. And what are you? Yeah, did we talk about what your hobbies are?
Oh, I don't have a ton of time for hobbies. I just started crocheting.
Okay.
I'm not 100 yet, but
Okay.
I'm planning for it. No, I took a crocheting class with my daughter and a friend and her daughter a few weeks ago, and the four of us are just like crocheting beasts now, just like making blankets. I'm about to start a bag. But what I found is doing things with my hands like that kind of helps me get out of my head.
Okay.
Back to that idea of like your head is always moving, your brain's active. Like I'm thinking about making sure I'm like kind of doing this, and you can't really be critically thinking about like solving the world's problems when you're like
Yeah.
crocheting.
So when you started, how many times did you stab yourself?
Oh, not, yeah, a few.
Does it hurt as much as I think it hurts?
I think it's more just you just get frustrated, or like I'll do a piece and then I'll hold it up and I'll spend like 2 hours on it and it's totally crooked and I just have to undo it and start all over. That happened a lot, and it will continue, I'm sure. I just finished a blanket. It looks more like a trapezoid than a square, but it's fun.
Nice. And you have people like all over the states. I think you have your content creators in LA, right? You have people like different
Yep.
places.
Yeah, we have actually right now we have 3 here. And then we have one that lives in Newport, in California.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's our team is 4
Okay.
right now. Yeah.
Any plan to grow it anytime soon, or?
We'll grow when it makes sense to. I think, like as I mentioned, we're kind of forming some partnerships, and so we have access to really, really quality, wonderful talent. And so I think we're kind of rethinking what that model looks like. And if it makes sense to bring on full-time people, we will. But if it makes sense to say, well, we really need an expert in this, somebody that knows how to do webinars for this very particular industry, and we have access to a person that has experience in that exact skill set, that makes more sense to just bring those people in to help us, So I think we're not sure.
And right now, how many customers do y'all handle right now? Like what's your max capacity, so to speak?
Well, so I think, it'll be like maybe around, I would say around 10.
Okay.
With the idea being similar to, you think of like a FTE or like a part-time, that it might be like 2 clients that we only do just social for. I would kind of count that as 1, if that makes sense. So I think we have the capacity to probably serve like maybe 8 full retainer clients right now, but then, a combination of little pieces too.
Okay. Is there anything I should ask you that I didn't, or anything else you want to talk about?
Oh, I'm just thinking. I don't think so. No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Yes, good question.
Besides the event your CEO is doing in April at Commercial Labs, any other events y'all have coming up that people can go to?
I'm doing a coffee with co-founders in Tacoma.
Karina?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that gonna be April 2 or May?
It's in April, and
Okay.
you're gonna ask me the date, and I'm gonna lie and say it's April 17th, but it might be.
I'll make sure I go to that.
Yeah.
Karina puts some good events. She usually has a good turnout for those.
Yes. Yeah. And I love the people that are bringing the love to Tacoma.
Yeah.
I live in the South End. I think that Tacoma is a really special place in many ways. And, it's not always easy to kind of be an innovator in Tacoma, but I think the more we can, back to that collective we, help make that easier for people, I think the better. I think Tacoma's a great city, and it has a lot of opportunity.
Yeah. Shout out to Karina. She does some good things down there in the South Side of Tacoma. Yeah.
She does.
But I don't know, one thing's like, you're right. Like, remember I said like Seattle tries to be San Francisco? I think sometimes Tacoma tries to be Seattle too much, right? Instead of like focus on what Tacoma can bring.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's a it's a brand opportunity, I think. And yeah.
There's so much talent. There's like 4 or 5 universities, not kind of junior colleges, the 2 military bases. It's
Yes.
like there's stuff down there, right? But it's always like I know they in the past people have tried to start communities and it faded away. I know Startup 253 is trying to do stuff and other
Yeah.
communities. It's just like I don't know. It's like
It's hard. It's hard. Tacoma is like, Grit City. There's this idea of Tacoma
yeah,
being this like,
being grimy and
yeah, it's
hardworking
just
and
like this really blue, that its roots are really kind of more like blue collar. But I think um that doesn't mean that there wasn't a tremendous amount of innovative spirit
yeah,
that got it to where it was. And I think that sense of like innovation and, grit is a very, very powerful trait
mhm,
for success.
yeah,
And so I think, um, I think that it has a lot of what it needs. I think I agree that it shouldn't present itself as like an alternative to
yeah.
Seattle or like we're just outside of Seattle, but it's like we're something quite different. It's a great place to live. It's a great place to, there's beautiful parts of Tacoma that you don't have in Seattle.
Like
It's a lot more
Western
affordable.
Ray.
Yeah, yeah, and like Old Town and up on the Proctor District and like there's just a lot of really cool areas and it's a great quality of life for people who maybe don't want
Sixth
to live in a
Avenue,
city
Jazz
that's big.
Bones,
Yeah,
the 2 comedy clubs.
totally. So I'm rooting for Tacoma and I hope that and there's some really cool stuff happening down there. I hope it continues
Yeah,
to
when you
grow.
go, have Karina give you a tour of the Washington incubator place too. That's a
Oh,
pretty cool place.
oh, is it?
Yeah,
Okay,
that
cool.
and they have the 253 as a creation station they have,
Oh,
like
yeah.
3D stuff, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I know like Dawn at the traction,
Yeah,
workspace. And
yeah,
there's a lot of people that are working hard for Tacoma and trying to create a great environment for startups. And I love that.
yeah. Can you share your social media for yourself and your company so people can reach out to you?
Yep, yeah. LinkedIn is probably the best for me and for S2S. So S2S PR on LinkedIn, and then Crystal Clarity on LinkedIn as well. I'm on Twitter. I don't use it very often, and our company is also on Twitter.
Okay. But LinkedIn is the main way, your main
LinkedIn is
social
the
media?
main one.
Okay,
Sign up for the newsletter. It's monthly. It's all valuable content to help starters or startups and small businesses thrive.
so you're already talking about like a lot of great stuff. Can you give us any last wisdom or advice or anything you want to talk about?
Um, you know, I think presence is probably the thing that is most scarce in our lives today. And I think the more we can carve out time to be fully present, the more successful we're going to be in all the work that we do, both personally and professionally. So if I could just put that out there is just a kind of a thought is seek opportunities to be fully present with yourself and with people because there has never been a time where there have been more distractions and more noise than there is now. And it's really hard to do good work and make big difference when you've got 27 things going on at the same time.
Crystal, thank you for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And to our listeners, thank you for your time as well. And remember to be great every day.